Warning, if you are mentally fragile, depressed, suicidal, or struggling with mental illness, do not listen to this episode. This episode may give you an existential crisis, depression, or suicidal thoughts. This episode may rob your life of meaning and purpose, cause mental instability, or lead to depersonalization. If you are into mainstream spirituality, this episode may piss you off. Welcome to the ultimate guide to solipsism. In this episode, you're going to get a definitive answer, a very clear-cut answer to the question of, is solipsism true? I'm not just merely interested here in discussing solipsism as a philosophical position that could or could not be true and leaving it up in the air. I'm going to give you a definitive answer, and I'm going to give you a method, a definitive method, a very scientific method for validating this answer for yourself so that you don't just believe me or take me on my word. And we're going to go through an exhaustive list of frequently asked questions, an FAQ, if you will, of just the common questions people have around this solipsism question. There are many, many different questions that people have. I get asked all the time on the forum and in the comments section, various kinds of questions. And so we're going to tackle all of these today. In fact, that's going to be the bulk of what this episode is just answers to common questions about solipsism and so forth. Before we get into that, though, let's sort of set the ground for the definition of what solipsism is. And for this, it's good to go to Wikipedia and just take a look at how it's defined. Because a lot of times people have sort of just an idea of solipsism, but they don't really think about what solipsism means. And then when they get the answer, they don't understand what the answer means. So here's what Wikipedia says solipsism is. Quote, solipsism, from the Latin solus, meaning alone, and ipsi, meaning self, is the philosophical idea that only one's mind is sure to exist. As an epistemological position, solipsism holds that knowledge of anything outside of one's own mind is unsure. The external world and other minds cannot be known and might not exist outside the mind. Metaphysical solipsism is a variety of solipsism, so it's a deeper version of solipsism, based on a philosophy of subjective idealism. Metaphysical solipsists maintain that the self is the only existing reality and that all other realities, including the external world and other persons, are representations of that self and have no independent existence. Furthermore, it says, the denial of material existence in itself does not constitute solipsism. A feature of the metaphysical solipsistic worldview is the denial of the existence of other minds. Since personal experiences are private and often considered ineffable, another being's experience can be known only by analogy. Some people hold that while it cannot be proven that anything independent of one's mind exists, the point that solipsism makes is irrelevant. This is because, whether the world as we perceive it exists independently or not, we cannot escape this perception, except via death. Hence, it is best to act assuming the world is independent of our minds. End quote. From the Wikipedia page on solipsism. So, before I give you the answer, first, what needs to be noticed about this issue is that mankind gives a very negative connotation to the term and the concept of solipsism. Have you noticed this? Notice this and start to wonder why. And if you are like the majority of mankind, you give a negative connotation to solipsism. Notice that you're biased against solipsism. My question to you is, why? Contemplate that. Why do you assume it's bad? Why do you assume it's crazy? Why do you assume it's impossible? Why do you assume it's unscientific? And what I want you to notice, if you're very careful with introspecting, as we've talked about in my episode called Developing Introspection, if you become good at introspection, what you'll notice actually, if you examine the contents of your own mind on this topic, is that, in fact, having a bias against solipsism or giving solipsism as a worldview a negative meaning is, in fact, unscientific and irrational. There's nothing scientific about not liking solipsism. If solipsism is true, then that is what's true, regardless of whether mankind likes it or not, whether you like it or not, whether your mom likes it or not, whether some scientist likes it or not. It's irrelevant. And likewise, if solipsism turns out to be true, it's irrelevant that you think it's not logical or that it's improbable or that it's crazy. This is all irrelevant. If we're doing a real scientific investigation into the nature of reality, then we should be open to all possible worldviews, explore everything, get to the rock bottom of what reality is, and whatever that turns out to be, whatever the truth turns out to be, then our job is to just accept that, and that is what is true. You see? But the way that most people throw out that word solipsism, they use it in an accusatory manner, like, oh, well, that is very solipsistic. And so, that doesn't mean it's not true. What does that have to do with anything? You see, we're interested in truth. We don't care what your feelings about it are. And a lot of times people accuse me and my teachings of being very solipsistic in this sort of negative fashion, as though this is some sort of insult to me to call my teaching solipsistic. So anyways, be very honest with yourself about that. Notice if you have this sort of negative predisposition against solipsism, and then ask yourself, is that in line with the spirit of seeking truth? Or is just that some sort of personal bias that you have? See? Because if you were truly interested in the truth, it wouldn't matter to you that something is solipsistic as long as it's true. And if you, in fact, loved the truth, and then you discovered that solipsism was true, you would then fall in love with solipsism, if it's true. So the question is solipsism true? And how could you possibly ever know? There's a very big mistake that people make, which is that they assume that it's impossible to know. But furthermore, they don't just assume that it's impossible to know, they take it as an absolute fact that it's impossible to know. And that's a very dangerous position to take. The mind takes that position without realizing that it's actually taking that as an absolute position. And what's worse is that a lot of scientifically minded people, atheistically minded people, and rationally minded people will take an absolute position on this point, that it's impossible to know whether solipsism is true or not. Or even worse than that, they say it isn't. Solipsism isn't true. Really, the way we want to approach this question is that what are we really asking when we're asking, is solipsism true? What we're really asking is, we're asking about the nature of other. There is self and there is other. Other as being anything that's not the self. So if you, whatever you take yourself to be, if you take yourself to be this human, then other is defined relative to that to mean everything other to you. It's sort of the inverse of your self-definition. And so the question really becomes, what is other? Well, to answer that question, you also have to know what is self, because self and other are interdefined as inverses of each other, like convex and concave. To know what concave is, you have to know what convex is, and vice versa. It's a duality. So in spiritual work, usually we frame the question as, what is the self? What am I? Who am I? And we do self-inquiry to get to the bottom of what the self is. That's one direction to go. That's the most common direction that people go in spiritual work as they're trying to awaken. But then there's a sort of a other direction, the inverse direction, which most people ignore. They don't think about very deeply. And that direction is, what is other? Have you contemplated that? How seriously have you contemplated that? Or do you just take for granted this notion of other, what other is? And see, if you haven't seriously gotten to the bottom, to the rock bottom of what other is, if you don't know the truth of what other is, then how can you even be sure that other is real or other exists? See, you have to be open to the possibility that you don't know what other is. And if you don't know what other is, your lack of knowing about it can be so profound that it might be the case that other doesn't even exist. What if, because other and self are so interdefined, that given how you've defined yourself, leads to a co-arising definition of other, and that if you expand or change your sense of self and your identity, then that will also change your understanding of other. And furthermore, open your mind to the possibility that if you expand your sense of identity or self to become infinite or absolutely total and all-inclusive, then that will literally leave no more room for other, and other may cease to exist as it collapses into yourself. And then all you'll be left with is yourself. But this will be a radically different notion of self than you and most of your compatriots have, because this would be a sense of self that is so large that it includes everything that you previously considered to be other. Now, the problem here is that even though I say this, and you might be somewhat open to the things I'm saying here, to these possibilities, the problem is that you're not grasping the depth of these possibilities and their consequences, very radical consequences, because your mind will tend to take this as just a word game. It's like, well, Leo, okay, yeah, I can play with my definitions of self and other, but these are just like conceptual things, right? Like, what difference does it make? It doesn't change what reality is, right? Well, if it was just a word game, I wouldn't be spending all this time talking about it. So clearly, we're doing this work because it's not just a word game. Something deeper is being said. So anyways, that's just to open your mind. I'm not gonna withhold from you anymore. So is solipsism true? The answer is yes. But I have some explaining to do about what that actually means. And in fact, it means something more radical than whatever you think it means. So most people object to solipsism and they say it's not true because if it was true, they think it's too crazy, too wacky, too radical. But the truth is that you can become directly conscious of what other is, and also of what self is. And then when you finally get to the rock bottom of what other is, you're going to discover that other is your own self, your own mind. And the consequences of this are so radical that they will shake you to your core. And they will lead to a radical recontextualization of all of reality and all of experience for you. And this is a very serious thing. It's no mere wordplay. And so my job is to help to guide you towards that. Now, this is tricky and difficult and even dangerous to do because most people don't appreciate just how much emotional investment they have in the concept of other being real. Your entire life hinges on this. Your entire sense-making apparatus, how you make sense of reality, hinges on a sense of other. Even all of your scientific theories and scientific explorations, all of your logic and all your rationality, it all hinges on a notion of other, which is taken for granted as being real. This sense of other sits at the very core of your psyche, not just psychologically, but deeper than that, existentially. And it's deeply interwoven with your sense of self and your identity, such that to take away from you, to rob you of a notion of other, will lead to a collapse of your entire mind and your sense of reality, because your sense of reality is tied in with your sense of self and your sense of other. But because we just assume that self and other and reality just are the way we think they are, we take all of that for granted, the possibility isn't even open in our minds that such a radical breaking down of these boundaries can happen, and it's impossible for us to even imagine what the consequences of that would be for our life. So I've actually held back for about a year now shooting this episode on solipsism. It's been an often asked question on the forums and elsewhere. I get asked about it all the time, and I've given answers to it, kind of one-on-one to people. But I've held back. The reason I've held back is because I've been trying to investigate and really double check, and not just double check, but like check over and over and over again that my understanding of this issue is correct. Because the potential for misleading people here is so grave that I didn't want to record this episode a year ago and then come up with new conclusions, a year later. I really wanted to make sure that I was very solid on what I was going to teach here. And so I held off for about a year or so, checking over and over and over and over and over again in my contemplations, in my awakenings, in my spiritual work, just verifying. I've verified not just a handful of times, but dozens of times, maybe even 50 times, because I wanted to be damn sure not to mislead people on this point. And so recently I've reached a new level of awakening. I know you guys are sick of me saying that, but honestly, I've reached a level of awakening that is unimaginable and that shook me to my core. And I don't even tell you guys anymore about the new crazy levels of awakening that I reached, because there's no way for you guys to understand it. So I don't even talk about it. The only reason I'm talking about it now in the context of this episode is because I just want to explain to you the amount of work that goes in. I'm not just sitting around and just building some philosophical scheme in my own mind and then teaching it to you. A lot of direct experience and a lot of work goes into these things that I talk about. And so anyways, I reached a level of awakening so profound that all sense of other for me collapsed completely. To the point where I became absolutely conscious that I'm the only conscious thing in existence. And that's what awakening ultimately is. You become so conscious that, of course, you realize that you're God. But then you become more conscious of what God really is. Because see, you can become conscious that you're God and all this. You can become conscious of no self. You can become conscious of love and so forth. but then you can still have remnants of your old worldview and your old life, of your old mind still present. And those remnants will include subtle notions of other. And so what's possible is that you can awaken, have some kind of degree of awakening, realize God and love and so forth, but then you can still hold out the idea that, well, but there's other minds out there. I'm not conscious of them, but there could be other minds out there beyond my own, and that we're all just part of a larger God's mind. See? And a lot of people treat awakening in this way. But if you awaken beyond that even, you become so conscious that your consciousness becomes completely absolute. This means that you're conscious of absolutely everything that there is. Everything. Now, you might say, well, Leo, but haven't you already confirmed this before? I mean, you have old episodes from years ago where you talk about this kind of stuff. So what's new here? Well, there's anything new here. It's just a larger sense of completeness and wholeness. And also just that, like I said, I've re-verified this now probably over 50 times to make sure that it's accurate. So it's not new, it's just that I've verified it a lot in ever deeper and deeper ways. And I mean, this is how science works too. It's like, at first you do an experiment, you get some result, and sometimes the result is kind of a crazy, wacky result, and you're like, wait a minute, that can't be right. Let me just double check. Let me do that experiment again. And so you do it again, and you get the same result, but the result is so radical that it's like, no, it still can't be right. Because if this is right, it contradicts all of science. So you do it a third time, and you do it a fourth time. And the question becomes, how many times do you do it until finally you go, okay, all of science is wrong then, because this result keeps coming up the same. Now, this is somewhat of a subjective matter. Do you do it 10 times, 20 times, 50 times, 1,000 times? How many times do you got to do it before you feel confident coming out there and telling the public, this is what it is? Of course, that's a very subjective boundary. Everyone will have their own different standards. I've actually been very careful about this because I've been wanting to record this episode for, like I said, over a year now, but I've held back. So anyways, when you truly understand what God is and yourself to be God, you identify with God ever deeper until your identification with God becomes so complete and so direct that you're absolutely conscious of everything. You're conscious of everything as being your own self, your own mind. And you have absolute consciousness. And what that means is that there can not be anything outside of your own consciousness. And you're absolutely conscious of this. And at this point, you're absolutely conscious that you're completely alone. And the reason it has to be this way is because God's mind is absolutely one, and it's completely sovereign, which means that everything has to be present within God's consciousness. There can't be anything outside of God's mind or outside of God's consciousness, because God's mind is infinite. And because it's all-seeing and all self-knowing. It's a complete self-recognition. It's a complete self-understanding. And so when you realize that, you're too conscious for any sense of other to remain. So actually what a sense of other is it's something that God's mind, your mind, is constructing in order to create the illusion of something other than your own mind. So within God's mind, there can be partitions that you can trick yourself into believing are something other than you. Other minds. You paint subtle imagery in your mind of like, well, my mom has her own mind, my dad has her own mind, my dog has its own mind, there are aliens out there with their own minds, there are computers that are maybe conscious with their own minds, and so on. But what you're not conscious of is that you constructed all those minds within your own mind. And furthermore, you're in denial about that. You see? And so it takes an enormous degree of consciousness, way beyond a standard awakening, to become conscious of what other is. So it's actually relatively easy to awaken to the fact of no self, or even to recognize yourself as God. That's all easy stuff compared to the higher awakenings of becoming fully conscious of what other is and how you construct other. And it's also a lot more threatening and emotionally difficult than it is to merely recognize no self and to recognize God or to recognize love. Those are all easy, emotionally speaking, compared to the kind of existential crisis that you will have when you realize what other is. In other words, you're going to realize that other is just your own construction. And the reason that is so emotionally difficult is that you're going to be left completely alone. You are the only conscious thing in existence. There cannot be any other conscious being but you. That's what you are. There are not multiple conscious beings out there. There are not souls. There are not parallel lives that are being lived. There's not a past life and an afterlife. There's only your mind right now. Your mind right now, what you're seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, smelling, thinking, imagining, that's all that exists. That's what existence is. Nothing more, nothing less, precisely that. You have 100% direct, absolute consciousness of existence. The mistake you're making is that you're imagining things that need to underpin this precise experience that you're having right now. You need to imagine things behind the scenes. You need to imagine your parents, you need to imagine animals, you need to imagine history, you need to imagine atoms, you need to imagine science, you need to imagine all of that stuff to explain the present moment. Otherwise, you'd have no explanation for the present moment. And so you keep dreaming that up. So that's what God is. God is an infinite mind that keeps dreaming up for itself an infinite chain of backstories to rationalize the present moment. And in this way, it creates a life for itself. It creates its dream. And outside of this dream, there's nothing and no one. And this mind is singular, and it's the only conscious thing that there is. And that mind is you. You are the only conscious thing that there is. And there will never be anything other than you forever. That's awakening. That's solipsism. Now, there's some common mistakes that come with the sort of mainstream notions of solipsism. The mainstream notions of solipsism don't include notions of God typically, and love, and infinite consciousness, and some of these other things that I'm talking about. So really what I'm talking about here is I'm talking about absolute solipsism. Solipsism as an absolute. The other problem with solipsism, as it's conventionally conceived, is that usually the person who's thinking about solipsism and denying it is coming from a materialist paradigm. So they have that as their background set of assumptions in their worldview. Materialism, also duality is part of their paradigm, whether they realize it or not. And also their ego mind is fully in control of that entire scheme. So they're thinking about solipsism from materialism, dualism, and their ego mind. And then so when I say that you are God or that you are the only thing that exists, it's like the ego mind can take that idea and say, oh, okay, so I, as the ego mind, is the only thing that exists. Like my human self is the only thing that exists. But that's not what's being said. Your human self is part of the construction. But what is being said is that your visual field, this bubble of consciousness that you are experiencing right now, that's the only thing that there is. There's nothing outside of your bubble of consciousness. Of course, it's not just the visual field. This includes the physical, tactile sensations you have, the emotions. All of this is part of your field of consciousness. Smells, sounds, thoughts, images in your mind, mental imagery, all of that. And that's it. That's all that ever exists. That's all that ever has existed. That's all that ever will exist. And what's more, you can know this absolutely. So this is not a speculation. This is not something you sit around in an armchair theorizing about and trying to convince yourself of. This is something you awaken to and you become absolutely conscious of. So an awakening is required to become conscious of this. And not just any awakening, but profound degrees of awakening beyond what most awakened people have awoken to. So you got to go very deep on this, to the point where you're absolutely conscious of everything. And when that happens, you'll realize that this is all there is. And that, of course, there can't be any other mind but your own, because your mind is absolute. And that is what reality is. That's what life is it's a dream dreamt up for an audience of one. There's only one audience. There's only one entity that needs to be fooled to construct reality. And that entity is you. And as long as that entity is being fooled by its own self, then it's dreaming up a reality, and it believes in this reality full of others and an external world. But as that entity awakens to its own self, it becomes conscious of how it's constructing all those others and the external world, and then it realizes that those were just dissociations of itself, split off portions of its own mind. That mind, this infinite mind, reintegrates those parts of itself until it becomes completely whole and absolute, sovereign, one. And then it realizes what it actually is. And what it is precisely what appears before it and nothing else. And it also recognizes that there are no other minds, but the one absolute mind that you are. So that's reality. That's the self. That's awakening. That's solipsism. That's God. Now you say, but Leo, this is crazy and it's impossible. It can't possibly be true. What kind of sick, twisted God would create a world like this? Why? Why would reality be structured in this way? Why wouldn't there be a real reality? Why wouldn't there be an external world? Why wouldn't there be other minds? But if you think about it more deeply, why would there be? Actually, this design that I'm laying out for you, this is the most elegant and intelligent design. If you think about the question of how do you get reality at all? Where does reality come from? How is reality created? This is a very profound question that you should contemplate seriously. Most people don't contemplate it. Even most scientists and philosophers don't seriously contemplate it because they take for granted all sorts of different things as existing without realizing that they need to be created first. So how do you create anything at all from scratch? You think, well, you'd have to make some atoms first. You'd have to make some physical forces. Maybe you need to invent mathematics first. No, that's not how it works. The way it works is that you need to dream up self and other and an external world and things outside yourself. And then you need to deny all this, and you need to fool yourself that you didn't create it. So this infinite mind creates itself and creates its own world, but it needs to deny that it's doing so in order to buy into the illusion. So the question is here, how do you create a sense of other? How does reality create a sense of other? Think about that. That's a profound existential question. You might say, well, Leo, a sense of other is like, one animal is born, that's one self, and another animal is born, that's another self, and they're other to each other. That's obvious. But it's not obvious because you're begging the question, you're taking for granted the notion of otherness. Even if you have multiple animals that are being born, who says they're not all the same self? Who says that they're other to each other? You see, you can't take that for granted. And science can't tell you what other is. There's no scientific instrument that you can point at an elephant and then at your own body. You point this little radar thing at an elephant and it says, oh, that's other. And then you point it at yourself and it says, that's self. And then you point one at your mom and it says, oh, that's other. Mom is other than self. And then you point one at something else and then you point one at your finger and it says, oh, that's self. You see, there's no such scientific instrument, nor could there ever be such a scientific instrument, because in fact, these are all completely relative distinctions and categories which don't actually exist. They're inventions of your own mind. And when you become really conscious, you realize that if such an instrument was invented and you pointed it, and it was a truthful instrument, you pointed at all the different objects in the world, what that instrument would read all the time is just self. Self, 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 self. Everything you look at would come out self. And if it didn't, the instrument is faulty. And that's exactly what the human mind is. It's this kind of instrument, but it's a finite instrument. It's faulty. It's self-biased. So it's looking around the world. It's categorizing self as this, but not that and not that. And then from this, all sorts of problems result. So actually, if you think about it, of all the different possible ways that reality could be designed, the most ingenious and most intelligent design solution is just simply, rather than creating a bunch of different creatures who have consciousness and creating atoms and which come up together and make molecules, and those molecules form neurons, and those neurons form synapses, and those somehow generate some sort of cloud of consciousness, and then within that cloud of consciousness, there's some sort of perceptions and stuff, and having multiple millions and billions and trillions of these different clouds of consciousnesses all interconnecting with each other and working together. This is sort of the scientific model of how reality is constructed. Rather than having all of that, all you need to do is just have one consciousness which fools itself with images of something outside of itself. Other minds, other consciousnesses. And that's it. This is the most genius and the most beautiful design for reality possible. It's also the most efficient, because you don't need to construct a bunch of atoms, trillions and trillions and trillions of atoms and planets and stars and multiverses and different minds and different organisms and all of this. You don't need any of that. All you need is one mind that dreams up everything else. It's like a stage set for a camera. For one camera. There's only one camera, and if you position that camera just perfectly within the frame of the stage, then you don't need to render anything outside the frame. Like in a video game, In a video game, frame rate is a very important metric. And computer programmers have to optimize the shit out of video games to get them to run at 60 frames a second or 120 frames a second or whatever the latest fastest rate is to get the smoothest, best performance. And the way they do that is by culling every possible thing that doesn't need to be rendered in the scene and in the frame out. So the video game world doesn't exist anywhere. And all the characters in the video game, they don't exist anywhere. A video game is just the current frame that is being displayed. That's what a video game is. It's a current frame. That's the most efficient design. Why would you need anything outside the current frame? Because all the player ever sees is the current frame. In fact, all the designer sees is the current frame. When a designer is conceiving a video game, he's only ever seeing that video game in his own mind one frame at a time. There's only one frame. It's how the game looks. That's it. And everything else is just in service to that one frame. But then there's one extra master stroke of genius that is involved in actually the way that reality is constructed versus how video games are constructed. The way a video game is constructed is that programmers and designers come up with a bunch of tools and other things and code and, XML files and other databases that are behind the scenes that are sourcing the frame and are in service to the one frame that is being rendered. So it might seem like the video game world has a bunch of different objects and files and databases and spreadsheets and other things that are feeding it. And that is sort of, you might say, like the substrate of the video game world. You might even say there's code, there's lines of code, which is like more fundamental than the frame itself. But see, the master stroke to how an infinite mind constructs reality is that it realizes that it doesn't need anything behind the scenes at all. And that in fact, the most optimal and energy efficient way to construct reality is to simply have a frame. And that frame, that one frame, is all of the data already folded into it. So the frame itself is the code, it is the database, it is the spreadsheets, it is the level designer, it is everything. The frame is that. And there's nothing underneath the frame. There's nothing sourcing the frame. There's not a mainframe computer in which the frame exists. There's not code. There's not mathematics behind the frame. There's not some other place that the data is being sourced from. There's just the frame. You see, because you can't really avoid the existence of something. You have to posit the existence of something at some point. So if you say that the frame is not base reality, you say, well, the frame has some other more fundamental reality underneath it that's sourcing it. Okay, well, fine. Let's just say that. Let's say the frame is not the real thing. Let's go to the real thing then. Let's go to the source. The source then is what? Computer code or something like that, you'd say, or some database or some computer or some hardware, silicon chip or whatever. Okay, but then what's the reality of that thing? You see? You're just pushing the problem down one level, you see? And you might say, well, but the silicon chip, it's made out of atoms or something, and you push it down one more level. You say, well, the silicon chip isn't really real. It's just a collection of atoms. It's just sort of like a epiphenomena of the actual atoms that are there. That's what's real. And then you say, okay, well, so then we have to take that the atoms are actually real. The atoms are base reality. So you look at that and you say, well, okay, so what is the atom? So no matter how low you go, at some point you have to bite the bullet of there being something. There has to be being there. And that being has to be absolute. So this is what science doesn't recognize. So see, rather than having this chain of different base realities, one more real than the other, that each kind of buttress each other and support each other, rather than playing this never-ending game of chasing your tail, actually what an infinite mind does, it just says, why do I need that? It's just as hard for me to create, or rather, it's just as easy for me to create the top level frame as it is to go through this chain of stuff and get to some rock bottom thing like an atom and create an atom. See, what you have to recognize is that from the point of view of an infinite mind, of universal mind, there's no difference between creating an atom versus creating an elephant. They're both equally easy to create. If you can create an atom, you can create an elephant. If you can create an atom, you can create a VR simulation that's running without a computer. You see, there's no limits to what an infinite mind can construct or imagine. So why is it going to make itself go through all these hoops in order to create something? It doesn't need to go through all these hoops. It can just create whatever it wants directly. So if it wants to create a human life, it doesn't need to create atoms and then molecules and then cells and then neurons and connect them into a brain. It doesn't need to do all that. It doesn't need to create a history. It doesn't need to create time or space. It doesn't need to create the Big Bang. It doesn't need to create an Earth that existed for 4 billion years with 4 billion years of evolution. It doesn't need to do all that. It can just imagine a human life, which is what it's doing right now, imagining this human life, and that's it. It needs nothing behind the scenes. It doesn't need evolution. It doesn't need physics. It doesn't need mathematics. It doesn't need anything. It can just imagine a human life. And then, in order to maintain that illusion of a human life, then it has to imagine and invent a chain of causations and stories, evolution, history, biology, chemistry, physics, time, space, whatever. It has to do all that in order to justify this frame. And the reason it invents those things is because it itself is asking the question, where did I come from? You see? The only reason you have stuff like biology, chemistry, physics, time, space, history, evolution, all this is because the mind that you are, remember back to when you were born as a human, the mind that you are is started asking questions. Where did I come from? What is this? You look at your body and you ask, what is this? You looked at the room around you and said, what is this? Where am I? And then you started filling in the blanks. It's like, well, I'm in a house. You walked out of the room, you saw, oh, it's a house. Then you look down on the ground and you say, oh, this is planet Earth. And then people showed you pictures of a round planet. And then you ask, well, but where did I come from? And your parents told you, we gave birth to you at a hospital. And they maybe showed you some baby pictures. See, and this was filling in the blanks in your mind of where you came from. This is the backstory. You were constructing this backstory all along. And then you opened some biology books, and the biology books told you that your body's made of cells and atoms and so forth, and then you believe that. And then you opened some history books, and the history books told you that, before your parents were born, your grandparents, they were in World War II. And before World War II, there was World War I. And before that, there was the, ancient empires, the Greeks and Romans. And so you keep asking the question, where did I come from? And you keep pushing the question back one step all the time in all directions, whether it's in the physics domain, in the biology domain, in the chemistry domain, in history, or whatever. See? And then you needed the theory of evolution, you needed the Big Bang, you needed to go to some sort of cosmology to explain where you came from. And so as a child, your mind was being fed with all of this. You weren't thinking about it very deeply, and you were constructing your psyche and reality at the same time. And really what you were doing is you were constructing a backstory for this current frame that is here right now. And of course, you populated that frame and your whole backstory with the idea of other. And you gave your authority away. You literally gave your mind away to these imagined others that you constructed, to your parents, various other kinds of authority figures, spiritual teachers of yours, professors, authors you respected, scientists, intellectuals, people you looked up to. You gave away your authority and autonomy and sovereignty, your absolute sovereignty as an infinite mind. You gave that away to all these other pseudo minds that you invented within your own mind. You gave away most of your authority to them, and you let them define for you what reality is. You let your elementary school teacher teach you about history, and you integrated that into your psyche and your understanding of yourself, reality, and other. And then you let your parents tell you about your ancestry and your lineage, your grandparents and great-grandparents, where they came from, cultures and customs that you picked up. You integrated that, you made that part of your identity and your psyche. And then your friends, and then your culture, it told you where the culture came from. There's a collective history of your culture that you were indoctrinated into, imprinted with. And then you went to university, and your university professors told you a bunch of complicated mumbo jumbo about where all of reality came from quarks or from strings or from some Big Bang. And then you believe that. And they told you about evolution, and you believe that. And the reason you believed all that is because you gave your authority away to all these different people, because you thought that, well, all of these people, surely they know better than I do. I'm just this ignorant child who was born. What do I really know? Surely these people around me must know what's really going on. But then again, weren't they also born in positions of total ignorance like you? So how would they know what's going on? But you just assume that they know that adults know what's going on. And so you did all this, and now you're sitting here and you're feeling comfy, like you got this sense of reality. You're sitting here on Earth in this universe that has been evolving for 14 billion years since the Big Bang, through a process of evolution, all this, this is your backstory. And you think this backstory is reality. But what if you're just dreaming up that entire backstory? Think about it. Isn't the following thing that I'm about to say absolutely true? Isn't it absolutely true that you are all that you've ever experienced in your entire life? Think about it. Before you were born, there was nothing. Then you were born, and all you ever experienced up to this point, and you've probably been alive for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years, up to this point, the only thing you've ever experienced are your own visual phenomena, auditory phenomena, bodily sensations and feelings, emotions, thoughts, mental images, tastes, smells, and that's it. Check this. Check that this is true. You've never experienced anything but your own mind. And by your own mind, I mean all of experience. There is nothing outside of your experience. All experience is your experience by definition. Now, people tend to nod along with that and say, yeah, sure, Leo, of course, that's obvious. But it's not obvious. You don't get it. You don't get that your experience is absolute. It's not just human experience. This is absolute being. This is the only experience, the only thing that exists anywhere. This, here, now, you're it. There's nothing else. There's never been anything else. If you want to be as scientific and rigorous as possible, then this is it. Everything else is assumptions, speculations, theories, presuppositions, and all of those are mental imagery, and mental imagery is already just part of your experience. So all of science, all of history, all others, that's all part of your experience. That's all you, in other words. It's not just your experience. You are experience. It's so obvious when you think about it. The problem is that it's too radical to really accept and to think about. And you take it all for granted because it doesn't really help you with navigating this experience, which is mostly what you're concerned about. And the real problem is that you've given away your own sovereignty and sense-making capacity to all these other idiots around you, parents, teachers, spiritual gurus, and so forth, who filled your head with all sorts of ideas, and you believe their ideas more than you trust your own direct experience, because your own direct experience tells you one thing, that you're the only thing that exists. But you trust others more than you trust your own direct experience. But do you see the problem with that? The trusting of others is a second order aspect of your own direct experience. So for you to be able to trust some professor or some scientist or some even spiritual guru, you have to assume that they're real first. They have to exist within your own experience first. So to give them any kind of authority or weight to what they're saying, you have to already assume their existence to begin with. And that doesn't come from them. That comes from you. You have to say that they exist. Because if you don't say that, then their words can have no authority. They can't even have words, because the words have to exist first before the words can communicate something to you or get you to believe something. You see? So it's a very, very elaborate illusion. Your own mind is spinning up reality, constructing it on the fly, and the problem is that you're not conscious of this, and that it's too scary to become conscious of it because it has very radical consequences for how you live life and how you interact with others. I want you to ask yourself seriously why you're so triggered by solipsism, why you're threatened by it, and why you're attached to reality being some other way than a solipsistic way. I want you to notice a fundamental need you have for the companionship of others, and that something is robbed from you at an emotional level, at the level of your psyche. Something is robbed from you when you lose the sense of other. It doesn't feel good. You don't like how that feels. And that is actually what's sourcing your objections to solipsism. If it wasn't for that, if you were being strictly objective, see, your mind for you frames it as like, oh no, Leo, I disagree with you about solipsism because of some sort of rational scientific reasons. And what I'm telling you is that no, the reason you disagree with me is not because of rational, objective scientific reasons. Because if you were truly being objective, then the most objective explanation of reality is that you're the only thing that exists, because that's objectively what's true in your experience. That's what's objective. So you're not being objective when you deny solipsism. In fact, you're being very subjective and biased. And I want you to notice that, and I want you to notice where those biases are being sourced from, because your mind is going to play the trick of denying that you're not being objective. Solipsism is what's objective. Solipsism is what's absolutely true. And then your denials of it come from an emotional reaction, because you have a vested interest for reality to contain a sense of other, because you don't want to feel alone. You have a vested interest for reality to have an external world, which is also another form of other, right? An external world is other to you. There's sort of the notion of other as a external inanimate objects, the external physical world that science tends to assume exists. But then there's also the sense of other as other minds like you. So you create both, and both are a kind of sense of other. See, this grounds your sense of reality. You very much want this to be true. And anything that says it's not true, you're going to resist. But then you're not just going to resist it, you're going to resist it in a very self-deceptive manner. You're going to resist it and also accuse me, the messenger, the one who's relaying this information to you. You're going to have to demonize the messenger too, right? because this is a game of denial that you're playing. And so you have to project any kind of frustrations you have with this inability to stomach the truth. You have to project it onto me. You have to demonize me in order to shut off the messenger. Because if you keep listening to the message, eventually you'll come around to realizing what's true. It's just obviously true, right? You can't deny that your experience is all that you've ever experienced, by definition. Now you say, oh, Leo, but no, yeah, I mean, I agree with that, but then couldn't there be something beyond my experience? That's within your experience. Anything beyond your experience, by definition, is within your experience. See, you can't escape this problem. It's absolute. What I'm telling you is absolute. There's no way to escape it. No matter what kind of mental gymnastics you perform, or tricks or thought experiments you perform, or science you do, or philosophy you do, anything you do is all going to be within your direct experience. There's no way out. It's absolute. So here's something that will help you to stomach this and to accept this. Look, the reality is that all of us are solipsists already, in at least the following way. We all accept that at night we dream, and that our dreams are completely solipsistic. So when you have a dream at night, when you have a nightmare, and in your dream you're killing somebody, or somebody is killing you, or somebody is killing somebody else, when you wake up from the dream, it's completely obvious to you that there was no other in the dream, that all of those dream characters were you. Even if they were evil, even if they were your enemies, even if they tried to kill you, even if they succeeded in killing you, or if you killed them, they were all you. That's completely obvious, and all of us accept that. After you wake up from a dream, you don't ask the question, well, but that person in my dream who I killed, did he suffer? Does he have a consciousness? Or, that computer in my dream, is that computer in my dream, like I dreamt of a supercomputer. I was having some sort of science fiction dream where I was in some sort of science fiction universe with conscious computers and robots and stuff. And did that robot really have a mind of its own? Or like in my dream, there was my dog. Did my dog really have a mind of its own? Was it conscious? How about the rock in my dream? I stubbed my toe on a rock. Was that rock conscious? You don't ask this question when you awaken from your dreams. It's silly. It's stupid. It's obvious that the dream was just your dream. And there was only you, the one dreamer. None of the other characters or objects or the world in your dream exists outside of you. It was all your own mind. Now, even though all of us accept that, then when I tell you that you're in a dream right now, you're dreaming right now. You're dreaming every character, every human, every rock, every computer, the world, science, math, history, evolution. You're dreaming all of that right now. See, when I tell you all that, and I tell you, wake up, and then in your mind you're thinking, yeah, okay, Leo, I'll wake up. But Leo, isn't my mom still real? Can't a computer have consciousness of its own? Does a rock still have consciousness? See, you still cling to these questions. But Leo, aren't you having your own experience right now? Don't you have your own consciousness right now as you're speaking to me? You're dreaming. You're in a dream. When you wake up from this dream, it'll just be you. Nothing else. Just you. See, spiritual teachings and traditions and teachers and gurus have taught since the dawn of time that life is just a dream. And you've heard that. You've heard me say that. You've heard other gurus and teachers tell you that. And you think you understand what that means. But you still cling in the back of your mind to this notion of other. That when you awaken from this dream, there will be an other there waiting for you. And what I'm telling you is simply that there won't be. There's just your dream. You're dreaming forever. And there's only one dreamer. And this one dreamer dreams all other dreamers. And that one dreamer is you. Full stop. That's it. It's that simple. It really is very simple. You understand exactly what I'm talking about when I'm talking about your nightly dreams. The reason you can't understand it, though, right now, when I'm talking about this dream you're in right now, is because if you understood it, it would end your dream. And you're very, very much attached to keep dreaming. So what I want you to notice here is the problem is not a lack of logic or scientific facts or objectivity or whatever in what I'm saying. The problem is that you're very, very, very attached to dreaming. That's the problem. And as long as you are attached to dreaming, nothing I say, nothing anybody says, no objective facts, no data, no science, nothing will ever get you to awaken. Because to awaken, you have to want to awaken and to stop dreaming. And most people don't want that. And even if you think you want that, you don't yet comprehend what it would mean to stop dreaming. How radical that would be. To become so conscious as to be fully lucid within your own dream. That's what awakening is. To awaken is to become fully lucid within your own dream, to understand how you're constructing the dream, and that it is all your dream, and to take 100% absolute responsibility for the dream, which means there's nobody else on whom you can place that responsibility or burden. There is not even an inanimate other on whom you could place the burden of reality. You can't say that, oh, well, there's some atoms that are constructing me. There's a brain that is constructing this. There's mathematical and scientific physical laws that are responsible for this dream. No. When you're fully lucid of the dream, you realize that you are constructing the entire dream, including all the atoms, all the laws, all the mathematics, all the brains and neurons, all that mumbo jumbo. You take full responsibility for constructing that. There's nowhere else you can place the responsibility for creation. And that is what is necessary to recognize yourself as God fully, because God is creator. To recognize that you are God is simply to recognize that you're responsible for creating everything in your experience right now. And to stop skirting that responsibility and offloading it onto other people and inanimate objects, physical laws, mathematical rules and systems and formulas, computer code, simulations, aliens, evolution, the Big Bang, cosmology, various kinds of supernatural deities who are other to you, Jesus, Buddha, Shiva. No, you take full responsibility that you create all that. The buck stops with you. You're God. So there's this great quote. I forget from whom it sources from. There's this great sort of quote that is used by atheists to argue against theists, and it goes something like this. The quote says, "We're all atheists. The only difference is that I believe in one less God than you." So even the theist, like the Christian, for example, the Christian is an atheist. You can make this very clever atheist argument that even the Christian is an atheist because the Christian denies all other gods except his own. So how difficult then is it to make one more step? I mean, if you deny an infinite number of other kind of gods, why not make that final step and deny even your own God? That's what the atheist would say. Like that. Well, I would say the same thing with solipsism, is that we're all solipsists. You have no problem understanding that your nightly dreams are completely solipsistic and imaginary, and that there is no sense of other in your dreams. We all admit that. And then I would just say that make that final step of realizing that this applies universally across the board to all experience, not just your dreams, but this experience that you're sitting in right now. And then you will realize absolute solipsism. And see, it's not so hard, because it's not hard for you to accept, for example, that all the characters in your dreams at night, that they're all imaginary. Is that difficult for you? Does that make you feel bad? Does that make you feel lonely? Not really. You just realize it's all imaginary. It's just a dream. But see, when you try to make that move now with real life, so to speak, that's a different story. Because see, you can pop out of your nightly dream into real life, the waking dream, and then you can ground yourself in this, and you can say, well, yeah, there's no real others in my dreams, Leo, but they exist here. You know, my parents don't really exist in my dreams, but they exist here in real life, and real life is not a dream. This is this little game that you play, right? And so this makes you feel comfortable and secure. It gives you a sense of other. But then when you pop out of this real life dream into the void beyond, there's nothing there but you. And see, this terrifies you. This presents some very big problems for you. The key is to realize the distinction between your nightly dreams and reality simply doesn't exist. That itself is an imaginary distinction. So solipsism traditionally does not acknowledge important aspects of what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about absolute solipsism here. It doesn't acknowledge the spiritual nature of solipsism. Usually when people talk about solipsism, they don't realize that solipsism is the very essence of spirituality. That connection is not made. Also, what's not acknowledged is love, God, will, intelligence, goodness, perfection, eternity, infinity, omniscience, immortality. These things are not acknowledged, but these are all part of what solipsism is. When you realize solipsism, you realize God, you realize love, you realize that this dream is your own will, you realize the infinite intelligence behind this dream, you realize the goodness and perfection behind this dream, you realize the eternity of this dream, you realize yourself as infinity, you realize your own omniscience and the absoluteness of consciousness, you realize your own immortality. What's also not recognized is that all mystical traditions and all religions essentially point towards solipsism, whether they realize it or not. The problem is that a lot of mystical traditions and religions are very corrupt, and even the founders of those religions may have not reached the highest levels of awakening, so maybe they themselves have not reached that final stage where the sense of other completely collapses. But if they did the work truly and they reached the final level, they would realize absolute solipsism. And you can find little tidbits here and there in different religions, different religious texts, different religious teachers and teachings and gurus. They throw you little crumbs here and there that allude to solipsism, if you research that stuff enough. And I gave, throughout my older episodes, I gave many examples little crumbs and tidbits that allude to this. In this episode, we're just making it very stark and very explicit. So there's nothing really new that I'm teaching you here. You should have already known all this stuff if you've been listening to my content, or really to any serious spiritual teachers. All right, so now you understand how that works. Now let's get to the FAQ, all the questions and objections. So first one is, but Leo, my enlightened teacher like Rupert Spira or some Buddhist monk that I listen to says that enlightenment is not solipsism. I explicitly asked them, is enlightenment solipsism? And they said no. What's up with that? Well, it's very simple. Your teacher or guru is not fully awake. There are many levels of awakening, and many teachers and gurus, whether they're Buddhists or Advaitins or Neo-Advaitins or whoever, Eckhart Tolle, Rupert Spira, whatever, they simply are not fully awake. They're not conscious of how they're creating all sense of other. It's hard for me to put into words the extreme degrees of consciousness that are required to realize this. This goes way beyond a typical awakening. There are many good awakened teachers out there who are teaching you some stuff about awakening, which is basically true, but they haven't reached the highest levels. And because of this, they're not conscious of what I'm talking about. Or some of them can. I'm not saying that I'm the only one who's conscious of this. Some of them can be conscious of it, but there are reasons why they might not tell you this explicitly. First of all, they might want you to discover it for yourself rather than just filling your mind with ideas. There's validity to that. I've spent a good chunk of time thinking about whether I should even record this episode because I don't even know how many people it will help versus hurt or confuse, because people are likely to just take this on as a belief rather than realizing for themselves. I could have taken the tack of saying that, well, I'm just going to let them discover for themselves. I'm going to share the methods and techniques of spiritual work. I'm going to talk about all sorts of other things, but I'm not going to just explicitly hit them over the head with the solipsism stuff. Also, a good reason not to do that is because it freaks people out. It scares people off. It's bad marketing. It's bad PR. It makes people very triggered and defensive. So there's practical reasons for why not to state it explicitly. So they might be doing it for those reasons. But even more so, some teachers do say it. Maybe not as starkly as I'm putting it here, but they allude to it. You just have to look very carefully at what they're saying and their teachings. For example, Ramana Maharshi. You might say, Ramana Maharshi was not a solipsist. But then when you actually read his answers, he clearly says that there is no other. How much more clear do you want him to be? See, the problem is that you hear that, but you don't. It's like in one ear and out the other. It doesn't register in your mind. It's not possible to register because the realization that there is no other is such a radical fucking realization that no amount of any guru telling it to you will get it to click in your mind. It's never going to click in your mind until you actually awaken to that fact. And the awakening to that fact will be so radical, it will shake your entire sense of reality to the core. You'll have a profound existential crisis. And that's also why teachers might not want to tell it to you directly, is because they know it's going to cause an existential crisis for you. And, why scare students off with that? Why? Because most students are not going to reach this level of awakening anyways. So why fill their minds with these scary truths when, in fact, like maybe only 1 out of 1,000 spiritual students who's really serious will reach this kind of truth. And when they reach it, they'll deal with it. They'll have to deal with it anyways. So why even bother sort of like talking about it? It's sort of like, if you have children, do you tell your children that they're going to die and that their death is going to be excruciating and miserable and depressing, that they're going to get cancer or that they're going to get heart attack or that they're going to just die of old age, and by the time they're 90 years old, their body's barely going to work, they're going to look awful and ugly, they're barely able to get out of bed because their body is in such disrepair from old age? Do you tell this to your children? No. I mean, do the children know about it? They sort of know it's going to happen, but you don't want to give the child all these gory details because it's just going to create nightmares in the child's mind. And then, why explain all this when the child will just find it out naturally through the course of its life? The child will grow up, and when the child is like 60 years old, the child will already start to get ideas, the adult at that point will start to get ideas of like, yeah, my death at 90 years old is probably going to be a nasty experience. It's not going to be pleasant. But, as a parent, you don't want to fill your child's mind with these things. So I think a lot of spiritual teachers can just hold off for that reason. And I've thought about holding off for that reason too. Another reason why spiritual teachers wouldn't tell you about this is because a lot of spiritual teachers are actually attached to teaching. And who are they teaching? If they truly realized that there is no other, they would have to stop teaching because there's nobody else to teach but themselves. For a lot of spiritual teachers, this teaching business becomes its own sort of pseudo-purpose, its own sort of pseudo-spirituality. They get a high off of it. They get a kick off of it. You can build a nice, juicy spiritual ego from teaching others about spirituality. Otherwise, what is there to do? Awakening is kind of boring when you have no one else to teach it to. Now, another objection here is, but Leo, there are not different levels of awakening. There are. There are levels of awakening so far beyond whatever awakening you think you've had or your teachers have had that, again, words do not exist to communicate these levels of awakening, which is why I've stopped even trying at this point. If you think there's one level of awakening, you're so fooling yourself. That's part of the problem here. A lot of teachers teach that there's only one awakening. And if that's your attitude, if that's what they've been taught, if they've only had one awakening, then that's why they're not talking about solipsism to you, because they haven't awoken deeply enough. Now, another objection here is, but Leo, you're misunderstanding enlightenment. This is not what enlightenment is. You're bastardizing enlightenment and you're corrupting it. No, you're misunderstanding enlightenment. How would you understand enlightenment? Where do your ideas about enlightenment come from? Do they come from direct experience? Do they come from your own profound enlightenment? Or do they come from books you've read and teachers you've listened to and YouTube videos you've watched? And even if they come from your own enlightenment, how do you know that your enlightenment is the highest enlightenment? See, you don't know. You have no idea. You have no idea what you're missing. You don't understand enlightenment until you have awoken so deeply that all sense of other has been lost. But Leo, Buddhism and Advaita don't teach this. You're corrupting, you're taking teachings, from yoga and Buddhism and Advaita, these old school traditions that are 5,000 years old, and you're corrupting them. Again, the problem is that you don't really understand these teachings. If you truly studied these teachings, you would realize, first of all, that they align very well with what I'm teaching you now. Firstly. Secondly, again, there are many versions of these teachings. A lot of these teachings have been watered down for Western audiences, especially Buddhism and Advaita have been watered down for Western audiences, for YouTube audiences, to write popular books like what Eckhart Tolle is writing and so forth. It's all been watered down. Spirituality has been watered down. And many of the people who practice Buddhism, Advaita, Neo-Advaita, and all this sorts of stuff, I've met these people. They're not profoundly awake. They're teaching something. They might have had a little bit of awakening here, a little bit of awakening there, but they're not profoundly awake. They don't really know what they're teaching. They think they know, but they don't. It's very easy to misunderstand Buddhism and Advaita. It's very easy not to see the consequences of Buddhism and Advaita. So be careful. Again, how do you even know that Buddhism and Advaita is true? What if they're not true? See, you just assume that. People get into spirituality and they find some spiritual teachers and they just say, oh, well, yeah, Eckhart Tolle must be telling me the truth. Rupert Spira must be telling me the truth. Mooji must be telling. How do you know? How would you know? You have no idea. But Leo, isn't this just your spiritual ego talking because you want to be the best, you want to be the highest, you have this bug up your ass about being the most woke? Yeah, it's true. I do have a bug up my ass about not being the most woke to outwake other people. I have a bug up about my ass about having a complete understanding of reality. That's my whole thing. That's what I've wanted. That's the one thing I've always wanted in my life, is just I wanted to understand absolutely everything. And so because of that, yeah, I attach a lot of importance to going all the way and to reaching the highest levels, because you can only understand everything at the highest levels, right? So I do care very much about that. The mistake, though, is that that's not ego. That's your genuine drive to awaken to what you are as God. That's the pursuit of truth. That's necessary to reach the highest levels of God realization. So if you don't have that, and if you mistake that as ego, you're never going to reach the highest understanding. But Leo, if what you say is true, who are you even teaching, and why are you teaching? Leo, doesn't your solipsism contradict itself? Because here you are talking about your own experiences, but what you're saying is that I'm the only conscious being. But you're talking as though you're the only conscious being. So you're contradicting yourself, so how can that be? Okay, this is the biggest objection, so listen very carefully, because this is a little bit tricky, right? Remember, language is relativistic here, so how we're using these labels, I and you and me and we, this is tripping you up. So look, here's the kicker. There is no one to teach but myself. I'm fully conscious of that. So there's absolutely no reason for me to be here teaching anybody. I'm just doing this because I'm playing a game with myself, because there's nothing else to do. If I wasn't doing this, I would be playing video games, or I'd be jerking off, or I'd be taking a stroll down the beach or something like that. And there's no difference between any of those things. They're all equally good. So, you do whatever you want to do once you awaken and once you realize that you're the only thing that exists. Do whatever you want to do. Whatever floats your boat, whatever gives you meaning. But here's the real kicker, all right? Look, even though I'm talking as though I'm playing a game, and you might say, well, Leo, but if you're playing a game and I'm playing a game, then there's two of us and we're both playing games. But that's not what I'm pointing to. There's something I'm pointing to here that cannot ever be spoken, because absolute truth cannot be spoken. So here's what's being pointed to, is that actually when I say that I'm playing a game, what I mean is you're playing a game using me as a fragment of your own mind. So I'm not teaching you. You are teaching you, because I am you. This body here that you think is sitting here, this is not my body. This is your mind. Actualized.org is your own mind. It's a dissociated portion of your own mind, which you need to reintegrate as you awaken, until when you do fully awaken, you realize that I have always been you. So the question isn't, why is Leo teaching me? The question is, why are you teaching you? And of course, the answer is, you're teaching you so that you can realize that you're the only thing that exists. You're using me as a foil for that. But Leo, don't you have your own experience? Like, I have my own experience, and then you have your own experience, right? No. There's only your experience. I am your experience. But Leo, why do you speak as though you have your own experience if you actually don't? Why are you tricking me? Again, I'm not tricking you. You're tricking you. The question is, why are you tricking you? Why did you construct me? You constructed me so that you could exist as something other than me. Do you see? You need to construct me that is separate from the human you so that you can maintain your sense of human you. It's a game of identity. You're playing a game of identity. As long as you want to maintain a finite identity, you have to deny me as a part of your identity, and your mom, and your dad, and your dog, and your sister, and Hitler, and Trump, and whatever else. You have to deny all those identities as part of your identity. And in order to do that, you need to give those separate identities. They're not really separate, but you think they're separate. You got to give those quasi-separate identities, you got to give them backstories. And you got to make it very convincing. You got to make it so convincing that you're completely fooled. Because if you're not completely fooled, you're going to awaken to the fact that it's just a fucking dream. So you better make your dream very, very, very real. Very realistic. To the point where you can't distinguish it from reality. And this is how you create reality. In order to do that, you need to really, really believe that I have my own experience, and that your mom has her own experience, that your dog has its own experience, that Hitler has its own experience. If you weren't doing that, you'd be awake. And if you were awake, there'd be no sense of other. And if there was no sense of other, then you basically couldn't have a human life anymore. So the reason you're fooling yourself is so that you can cosplay as a human. You are God cosplaying as a human. And you enjoy it. You like cosplaying as a human, and so you want to continue doing that. And what I'm telling you here is throwing a wrench in the works. You see, this is really screwing up your cosplay. And you really believe you're not cosplaying here. Let's go through a little very basic exercise. I want you to take your finger right now, point it at the screen, point it at me. You're watching me on a screen. Point your finger at me. Actually do this with me. Point your finger at Leo and say, that's Leo. Now take that finger and turn it around, point it at you, like this, point it at you, and say, that's me. Whatever your name is, that's me. This is Leo, that's me. Leo, me. Leo, me. Like that, right? And now what I want you to do is to take that finger, point it at Leo again, and here's the trick. Now you turn it around and you point it at you and you say, that's Leo. That's Leo. While you're pointing it at your chest. That's Leo. Keep doing that until you realize that I'm not in the screen. I'm not outside in some other dimension. I'm not on some other side of the world. I'm behind your eyes. I've always been behind your eyes. I'm you. Your body, look at your body. Your body is my body. But then you might say, well, but Leo, then what is this? What is this body here on the screen, in the video? What is that? Well, that's also you. Every body is yours. Literally, every body is yours. this is all your mind. This is all your dream. All the bodies in it are projections of your own mind. But Leo, if I'm imagining you and you're imagining me, how can that be? That doesn't compute. It's illogical. It doesn't compute because there's only you imagining me. Stop imagining that I have any experience or consciousness or mind outside of you. Keep doing that, not just with me, but with everybody else. Keep doing that and doing that and doing that and doing that until you are left completely alone in a solipsistic bubble of your own consciousness, until there's nothing left but your own bubble. And when that happens, that's awakening. But Leo, if I awaken, will other people, what about other people? Are they going to awaken too? Like, Leo, you're saying you're awake, but then you're saying I can awaken, but how can, Leo, how can you have awoken? And how could others and other teachers have awoken if you're saying that I'm the only thing that exists? Again, when we say that other teachers have awoken, when I say that I have awoken, what that really means is it's not that I'm saying I've awoken or other teachers are saying they've awoken. What is really happening is that you are imagining that these different entities have awoken as an example for you to awaken the only thing that can awaken, which is your own self. You invented characters in the dream that have awoken, when in fact, there's only one entity in the universe that can awaken, which is yourself. But you invented these different teachers and gurus and whoever else you look up to as, again, examples of what you yourself will do in your life. So the only one who can awaken is you. Only God can awaken. There's only one God. That God is you. There's not multiple gods. There's not multiple awakenings. It's just you. So when I say I've awoken, again, you have to understand that I'm using language in a very sophisticated way. Language is sophisticated. Not just me using it, but all of us are using language in a very sophisticated way, a very relativistic way. So when I say I've awoken, I am saying something relative to the entire paradigm of how our language works, right? We have certain cultural definitions of what we mean by me and by you and by us and by humans, and that I am separate from you. These are all, our language is completely laced with implicit metaphysical and epistemic assumptions. And so when I'm speaking using ordinary language, I am adopting all those assumptions. That doesn't mean that those are true assumptions. It's just baked into our language, see? So I'm using your own paradigms to communicate to you. So yeah, I do speak as though I have my own experience. I do speak as though I've had awakenings and so forth, and other teachers do that too. But that's just all part of the elaborate mechanism of your own mind that is constructing these senses of others. In fact, the way you imagine others is so powerful. You have to understand how powerful this is. It's such a powerful degree of imagination that there's virtually no difference between me being real versus not, because as long as you're imagining me to be real, and you're believing that I'm real, and you believe that I have experiences, and you believe that I've had awakenings and all this, and you believe that when you die, I will still exist. For example, like you believe that if you die in a car accident tomorrow, Leo will still exist. The world will still exist. As long as you're imagining that, that is true for you. You might say, well then, Leo, well then, why don't we just say that people are real then? Why are you saying they're not real? If you're saying that imagination is as good as reality, then what's the point? Why not just call everything real? Well, there's an important difference though. The difference though is that you can awaken to the fact that you're imagining me. So under the normal conception of things under the materialist paradigm, the dualist paradigm, and so forth, where you believe others are real. The difference is that from that paradigm, there's no possibility of awakening and realizing that you're constructing me. Whereas from what I'm teaching you, there is. So there's a level of consciousness that you can reach where you will erase my own existence. Not just in your own mind, but period, absolutely. I will cease to exist because you will cease to imagine me. This is not possible under the materialist paradigm, because under the materialist paradigm, people just somehow exist separately from you, separately from your mind. They just exist. The world just exists somehow out there. We don't know where, we've never seen it, but it just exists and we just believe it and we never question it. But when you become fully conscious, you realize, no, there's no world outside of your own mind. This sort of logical paradox between this problem of like, you're imagining me and I'm imagining you, and how can that be? This is not a bug, this is a feature. Really open your mind to the possibility that it's just you and you're imagining everyone else. And you're imagining me imagining you. You're imagining my awakenings. You're imagining my experiences. You're imagining my pain, my suffering, my joy, my happiness, whatever, my orgasms. You're imagining all those. Every orgasm that every human has ever had, you imagined all of them. All the suffering that any human or animal has ever experienced, that was all in your own mind. Think about it. This is a bit of a Fight Club moment right here. This is the plot twist. All the suffering and all the death that has ever happened in the entire universe has been nothing but the imagination of your own mind. Think about it. You've never experienced death, but you sure have imagined a lot of animals and humans dying. Maybe even some of them very, very close to you. And you really believe that one day it'll happen to you too, that you too will die, just like all of them. But notice, that's just a belief. That's just an assumption. It's never actually happened to you. And in fact, it never will happen to you because you're God. You exist eternally. You're eternally conscious. You can't actually die. You can imagine everybody else dying. You can even imagine yourself dying, but you can't actually die. And when you realize this, this is awakening. This is what's referred to in the mythological, in the mythology. This is what's called the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail that Joseph Campbell talks about and that many myths talk about, that the Bible talks about and so forth. The Holy Grail is not a physical object. The Holy Grail is simply the realization that the death of everyone, including yourself, is a construction of your own mind. And when you realize that, then you're immortal. But Leo, isn't solipsism self-contradictory? No. In fact, solipsism is completely self-consistent. It's one of the few very self-consistent philosophies out there. The reason solipsism can sometimes come off or seem as self-contradictory is simply because the person who's assessing the solipsism is very resistant to solipsism, and therefore they're trying to mesh solipsism and fit it into their materialist paradigm. When you try to fit solipsism into materialism and dualism, yeah, it becomes contradictory. So for example, if you assume that I have my own experience and that I'm not a feature of your own mind, then yeah, it does seem contradictory, because then it seems like, well, Leo is talking about his own experiences and using the word I. Leo is talking about himself in the first person. That must mean he's real. But that's not what solipsism says. What solipsism says is that when Leo is talking in the first person about his own experiences, that's just your own imagination. That's your dream. In the same way that if you were dreaming at night and you met me in your dreams, some of you have, I know, some of you have met me in your nightly dreams, and you're having a conversation with me, or we're doing something, whatever. I sure feel real, don't I? You might even confuse me for the real me. In your dreams, it certainly feels like I have my own body. I speak about myself in the first person. I have my own experiences. I could even be very awakened, and I could have magical powers or whatever you might imagine in my dreams. I mean, in your dreams of me. Seems all very, very real. But then you awaken and you realize that was all just my own mind. And there's nothing self-contradictory about that. See, you're dreaming. There's no contradiction. You're dreaming. The problem, if you think there's a contradiction, is that you're not grasping the depth of the dream. You're not just a little bit dreaming. You're dreaming absolutely. You're dreaming absolutely everything. So even when you're arguing with me, when you're denying, when you're projecting, this is all still part of the dream. Even when you're thinking about materialism, that's still part of the dream. When you're thinking about science and math and logic, that's still all part of the dream. There's no escaping this dream. You're always dreaming. But Leo, what about all those other entities and higher beings that New Age people talk about? They talk about DMT, machine elves, and they talk about spirits and ghosts and deities and angels and higher dimensional beings and lower dimensional beings and evil beings. What about all those? Well, those are no different than humans and animals. You're imagining all of them. So if you see a DMT machine elf, it's as real as Leo. If you see a ghost, it's as real as Leo, which means it's just a part of your dream. See, you can populate your dream with whatever entities or deities you want. It just makes your dream a little more juicy and more exciting. But Leo, there's no possible way that you could know for sure that other minds and beings do not exist. Therefore, your claims of solipsism must be overblown because you're just speculating. There's no way you could actually know. Well, either there is no way I could know, or maybe there is. You have to open your mind to the possibility that there is a way that you could absolutely know. It's actually, notice, it's actually a dogmatic assumption for you to assume that it's impossible to know something. Maybe it's impossible, but maybe it's possible. How could it be possible? Well, infinite consciousness. Open your mind to the possibility of infinite consciousness. Imagine that you became infinitely conscious of absolutely everything in existence. We would call this total omniscience. Imagine you became totally omniscient. If you did, if that was possible, then you could see literally everything. You could see out into the infinite horizon in all possible dimensions, and you would see everything that exists. Now, most people would think that that's impossible. Most scientifically minded people say that there's no way that's possible. But that's only impossible if materialism is true. If materialism is not true, then the possibility opens up for infinite consciousness. If reality is not a material system but an infinite mind, then there's a possibility that this infinite mind can just simply know itself infinitely. And that is what we call awakening. And if you experience this infinite consciousness and this profound degree of awakening, what will happen is that you will literally become so conscious that you will be conscious of everything in existence. And you will realize that there's nothing in existence but what you're conscious of right now. And this completely kills the possibility of other minds. God cannot have other minds because God is an infinite mind. Now, an infinite mind can create finite sub-minds within itself, but there cannot be any other infinite mind to rival it. It has to be the highest mind. God's mind is the only mind. This is oneness. This is the principle of oneness. And so what I'm telling you is that you could speculate about solipsism as a philosophy. You could take it on as a belief system or as an ideology. That is all very distinct from what I'm talking about, which is becoming absolutely infinitely conscious of the fact that there cannot exist any other minds but your own, or rather that all other minds are simply sub-minds of your infinite mind. That's what you become conscious of. That's possible to do. That's my claim. And I'll give you a method for validating that claim in a moment. But Leo, if others aren't real, why do you say that this teacher here is not fully awake, but that one is? Why do you criticize various kinds of enlightened teachers then? Again, I'm speaking relativistically. When I'm doing that for your own benefit. In fact, it's your own mind that's doing that for your own benefit. So you could distinguish between different levels of awakening and different degrees that you yourself can reach, right? Because how else would you communicate to your own self that there are different degrees of awakening and to ensure that you reach the highest level? Well, you do that by pointing to certain people and saying, well, this person has reached that level and this person has not. So you're doing it, again, through me for your own benefit. But Leo, if what you say is true, why isn't everybody talking about it? This would be like the biggest news. This should be plastered on all the billboards and on CNN and everywhere else. Look, if what I'm saying is true, there isn't anyone but you. So who would be talking about it? Why would they be talking about it? Furthermore, if what I'm saying is true, what I'm saying is that you are deliberately avoiding it. So the reason people aren't talking about it is because you are avoiding it. You don't want people talking about it. And other people don't want to be talking about it because they're also avoiding it. Everyone's avoiding it as part of a conspiracy to help you to avoid it. You see? If everybody was talking about it, if it was plastered on all the billboards and it was run on CNN, you would already be awake. And you wouldn't watch CNN, and you wouldn't do a lot of other stuff that you do. Most of society, as we've talked about in the past, is geared towards keeping you asleep. It's an avoidance mechanism. It's a very elaborate avoidance mechanism. But Leo, I called my mom and I asked if she has an experience of her own, and she told me yes. Why would my mom lie to me? That sounds so cynical and so conspiratorial and sinister almost. It's like you're telling me that my mom is some sort of a demon, evil demon, trying to fool me like Descartes' demon. No, I'm not telling you that your mom is an evil demon trying to fool you. I'm telling you that you are God fooling your own self using your mom. You're dreaming. You're dreaming your mom. And when you ask a dream character in your dreams, are you a dream character? The dream character will tell you, of course not. Why? Because there needs to be an illusion of a dream. The dream characters can't all come out and say that it's a dream, because if they did, the dream would collapse. But Leo, then are you saying that my mom is just faking it? No, I'm not saying your mom is faking it. I'm saying you're faking it. There is no your mom, there's you. You're deceiving yourself completely. But Leo, why would I deceive myself like that? Because if you didn't, how else could a human life exist? How else could God experience what it's like to be a human? God is singular. God is a singular infinite mind. It has no other. God needs to create, if God wants to experience what other feels like, God needs to create a pseudo-other through a mechanism of self-deception. Because if God is not self-deceived, God is one and infinite and the only absolute consciousness. It's the only conscious being. So God must fool itself if it wants to experience any sense of other. But Leo, this sure sounds like a conspiracy theory. I thought you were against conspiracy theories. Well, actually, in my episode called The Sneaky Psychology Behind Conspiracy Theories, I sort of shit on most conspiracy theories, but then at the end, I tell you why I shit on all these different conspiracy theories. The reason I do that is because there's really only one conspiracy that you need to be worried about in life. You know, it's not the globalists, it's not the reptilians, it's not the Jews or whatever. The only conspiracy theory that matters is your own self-deception. It's a conspiracy of one. Think about this, when you're dreaming at night, what is that but a conspiracy of one? You're conspiring against yourself to construct a story and live through it. So that's the only conspiracy theory I'm interested in. Everything else is just a sub-conspiracy within the meta-conspiracy of cosplaying as a human. So you're God cosplaying as a human. Yeah, that's a bit of a conspiracy. It's an illusion. But nobody is doing it to you, you're doing it to yourself. That's also the difference between what I'm talking about and something like simulation theory. You know, well, Leo, isn't this all a simulation? No, it's not a simulation. It's a dream. See, a simulation applies beyond other things. I've talked about this elsewhere. I have an episode about why simulation theory is wrong. But what's relevant here is that simulation theory still maintains a sense of other. See, it offloads responsibility for construction of reality and the illusion of reality off to somebody else. Like, it's the computers behind the scenes that are doing. It's the aliens who constructed this VR conspiracy or this VR reality and this simulation. They are the ones who are behind the scenes controlling everything. They're the puppet masters. No, there's no puppet masters. You're God, you're the puppet master. That's the difference. You see? That's where God comes into play. Simulation theory doesn't explain anything because it just pushes the problem back one level. Then you have to explain where the people who are running the simulation, where they came from. Are they themselves in a simulation? How many simulations do you have? Where does it stop? Well, of course, it all stops with you. Now you might say, but Leo, how could I be the only one? You're saying I'm the only conscious thing in existence. Isn't that kind of unlikely? What are the odds of that? But actually, we can flip that around. Think about this. You are conscious. You've always been conscious as far as you know. So actually, the odds of you being the only conscious being in existence are 100%. Why? Because you're conscious. You've always been conscious. You're the only thing that's ever been conscious. So what are the odds of that? 100%. Your consciousness is absolute. There's no probability you can apply to consciousness. You can't just do some sort of Bayesian reasoning and say, well, what are the odds that I could have been born on a planet and I could have been conscious or not born or born as some animal or whatever? No. The odds of you being conscious as you are right now are 100% because you are conscious right now at 100%. Actually, what's weird and doesn't make sense is under materialism, you can ask the question, what are the odds under a materialistic paradigm that I would have been born as a human who's able to be conscious of this universe? The odds of that are so small under the materialist paradigm. It's infinitesimally small. But under the idealist paradigm, under the solipsist paradigm, the odds are 100%, which is exactly what you need to construct reality as it is. Haven't you noticed that for your entire life, everything that you've ever experienced has always revolved around you? Hasn't it struck you as kind of strange that the entire universe seems to revolve around you? See, that's been happening to your whole life, but you've never really stopped and wondered about that. You've never wondered, like, what are the odds of that? What are the odds that the entire universe would revolve around me? Is that just an accident? Was it just an accident that I was born? That's how it feels under the materialist paradigm. It's like, yeah, I was just an accident. But what if you weren't an accident? What if you are the absolute? What if you are the only thing that's a certainty is you, your mind, your consciousness, and then everything else, that's all contingent and accidental, part of a story? What if reality is not a material system? What if reality is just a single lonely dreamer dreaming forever, infinite dreams? What if that's what reality is? Why aren't you open to that possibility? But Leo, if I'm the only one, where did I come from? Well, of course, you've always been. You've always existed. You're eternal. You've always been conscious. You didn't come from anywhere. You imagine all places. You imagine all people. You imagine all objects. And you invent stories for where you came from by hitching your source to some other object you're imagining. But actually, the source of all those objects is you. So you are the source. It's not where did you come from, it's where did everything else come from? And the answer is, it came from you, because you're the only thing that's always been. And this, of course, means that your birth is imaginary. So you're saying to yourself, Leo, but I was born. I have memories of being born. Yeah, you're imagining that. You're dreaming that. You were never born. You did not come from your parents. You did not come from an ancestral lineage. You did not go through a process of evolution from bacteria to fish, to lizards, to dinosaurs, to monkeys, to Homo sapiens. That's not where you came from. You're an infinite mind that has always existed. You're God, and you're imagining all of that evolution and all of that science and history and all that other stuff. But Leo, can't a computer become conscious? Isn't that possible in the future? And wouldn't that contradict your solipsism? The only conscious being in the universe is you. Nothing else can be conscious but you. However, when you're talking about a computer becoming conscious, that's like talking about your dog being conscious, or for that matter, that's like talking about Leo, me, being conscious. And in that sense, you're using it in a relativistic sense now. Yeah, you can certainly imagine that Leo is conscious. You can imagine that your dog is conscious. And you can imagine that your computer one day will become conscious. And maybe it will through, scientific method, because scientific method is also imaginary, through science and so forth. Yeah, I anticipate that in the future we will have what we might call conscious computers, or like computers with egos and so forth. But even if that happens, that computer will just be nothing other than like another human, another character in your dream. You can have a dream tonight as you fall asleep. Try dreaming of a conscious computer. You might succeed in doing that. And it'll feel very conscious when you're interacting with it and so forth. It'll behave. When we say a conscious computer, what that really means is it'll behave exactly the way that a conscious agent might behave, with all that complexity and sophistication. You can certainly dream that up in your dreams, and it'll be like a science fiction movie. But then you'll awaken and you'll realize, of course, that it was all your own mind. So there's no problem imagining a conscious computer, because you're already imagining conscious animals and beings and so forth. That's just one extra thing, to add to your list of stuff you're imagining. But Leo, what about the suffering of others? Isn't that real? And the shocking thing is that, of course not. There's only one conscious being in the entire universe who suffers, and that's you. Ask yourself, where has suffering ever existed? What is the scientific proof for the existence of suffering? You might think, well, Leo, science tells us that all of us suffer. No, it doesn't. Suffering only exists within your consciousness. That's the only place it's ever existed, and the only place it'll ever exist, because the only place anything exists is in your own consciousness. Yeah, but Leo, but like if I kick a little dog, isn't it going to suffer? I can see it suffering and whimpering and all this sort of stuff. Yeah, that's how powerful your dream is. In your dreams, next time you're dreaming at night, go up to your mother and stab her in the heart with a knife. In your dream, I'm not saying in real life, don't do this in real life. In your dream, stab your mother in the heart with a knife. And, but don't kill her, just like wound her. And then feel her suffering. She will suffer from this, physically and psychologically, and experience that. And then wake up from your dream and then ask yourself, what about her suffering? Where is the suffering? Was it real? Again, I am not giving you license to stab your mother in the chest in real life. I'm talking about your nightly dreams here. Don't get me wrong. Don't take me out of context. So actually, it's interesting that suffering is one of the most juicy mechanisms that God uses to keep you asleep, to keep itself asleep. See, to have this dream really feel solid and real, there need to be different mechanisms for making it very, very sticky. And one of the ways you make it very, very sticky is you make suffering feel very real. Both in your direct experience, you hate suffering, but then also you hate seeing the suffering of others. And then you can devote your entire life to trying to reduce the suffering of others. For many people, this becomes their entire life purpose and their entire ordeal of like going around trying to save the whole world. Well, think about it. What does that accomplish? That accomplishes a complete buy-in into the dream. You are so wrapped up with the suffering of little children and dogs and this and that and the environment. You're so busy running around doing this your whole life that it never even occurs to you that any of this could be an illusion. And that's exactly what you want as God to cosplay as a human. To construct a human life, you need mechanisms in there to make it feel like it's a real life and not just some flimsy VR simulation where there are no consequences. The reason life has serious consequences is because that's what sells the illusion. The consequences need to be so poignant that you are so obsessed worrying about the consequences that it never even occurs to you to ask the question, is this real? Could I be dreaming? That's the whole trick. It's like, but Leo, that sounds so outlandish and implausible. But no, it's not implausible, you see, because really ask yourself the question, if you were God constructing a dream, how would you have to construct that dream to really fool yourself into thinking that you're like living a human life and that you're not God? You would have to make the consequences and the pain and the frustration of life so overwhelming, so difficult to ignore, that you would never do any existential questioning. You would never sort of peek behind the curtain because you'd be too distracted by all the commotion, by all the sex, all the food, all the pain, all the misery in the world. You'd be so distracted and titillated by all this stuff. You'd be running around like a kid in a candy store, that it would never even occur to you to wonder, is any of this real? And that's how you create reality. Ta-da! You see, you have to create a drama. It has to be like a drama. When you're watching a movie, what sucks you into the movie? You're sitting in a movie theater, you're watching the movie, eating your popcorn. 2.5 hours go by like that, if it's a good movie. But what makes it a good movie? What makes those 2.5 hours go by like that? It's the drama. It's the characters who are being shot and killed and maimed and raped and tortured. You love this shit. Don't tell me you don't love this shit. Don't tell me you don't love a good drama. You love it. You go to horror movies to see the most despicable shit happening on film that could be imagined by a mind. You go to these horror movies, and why? Why do you watch these action movies where, Arnold Schwarzenegger is, shooting people in the chest and shit, killing 100 people per hour in the movie? Why? Because this is what you crave. You crave some kind of distraction. If you were sitting there looking at a movie that had no compelling drama, nothing cool or interesting happening, no fight scenes, no sex, none of this stuff, no pain, no suffering, if it was just like a couple of cartoon characters who were just blissing out in joy, sitting under a tree meditating, if that was the movie for 2.5 hours, that would be the most boring movie, and you would get up and walk out of the theater, and you would say, what bullshit is this? This is not immersive. And again, think about how video games work. What do you want? Do you want an unimmersive video game or do you want an immersive video game? You want an immersive video game. Therefore, what do you put into the video game? You put in all the shit from real life into the video game. An immersive video game is like a video game where you have to cook your own food. Why are you cooking food in a fucking video game? Does the video game character need to eat food to live? No, it's been put in there so that you have some bullshit to do so that you feel like you're in a real world. If a dinosaur is chasing you in a video game, is there a reason to be running away from it? Is it going to eat you? Is it going to hurt you when it catches you? No, but you put it in there so that there can be a game, so that you have some sort of reason for exploring that world. Otherwise, the world would be boring without any dinosaurs or enemies or people shooting at you or lava pits that you could fall into. Does lava really hurt Mario when he falls into it? No. It's for the sake of constructing a juicy illusion. So this is not outlandish. Notice that this is a deliberate part of the design. This is how self-deception works. Stop thinking of self-deception as just some sort of silly thing that human creatures do to fool themselves because we're kind of stupid and we don't know how to use logic correctly. No. Self-deception is existential. It's metaphysical. Self-deception is what constructs reality. Start thinking of self-deception like that. Start thinking of atoms as self-deception. Start thinking of evolution as self-deception. Start thinking about physics as self-deception. Start thinking about time and space as self-deception. Start thinking about other beings as self-deception. Start thinking about planet Earth as a self-deception. That's the level of self-deception we're talking about here. It's a metaphysical self-deception. So see, you spend a lot of time worrying about others suffering, and this really draws you in. Pain. Pain is one of the easiest ways for God to fool itself, because when you're in pain, all philosophy flies out the window. All concern for truth flies out the window. All spirituality flies out the window. If I stick an ice pick into your gut, that's going to feel very real to you. And the idea that you're dreaming is going to fly completely out the window. And yet, in that moment, you're completely dreaming. It's just a dream. Pain is part of the dream. Excruciating pain is part of the dream. But Leo, if suffering doesn't matter, why shouldn't I just be selfish then and harm others? Well, we have to be very careful here. Like I said, this is a dangerous episode. There's a lot of ways that what I'm saying here can be abused and misused by devils. So, from the ultimate existential absolute truth perspective, there's no reason why you can't be selfish and a devil and go around harming others. And in fact, a lot of people live their lives this way. In fact, you currently already live your life this way. You're selfish. You're extremely selfish. You've been selfish your whole life, and you've harmed lots of people. Now, sure, You can always harm a lot more people, but you've harmed plenty of people in your life. So you're already doing it. But what you're asking is, well, Leo, why should I better myself? Why should I just be more of a jerk? And the answer, of course, is there's no reason at all. If you want to be a jerk, be a jerk. If you want to be a murderer, be a murderer. If you want to be a rapist, be a rapist. Nobody is stopping you. But be careful. Don't misunderstand. There will be consequences within the dream for your selfish behavior. So if you're going to be a rapist and a murderer and a thief, and you're going to be very selfish, and you're going to be a jerk to people, and you're going to abuse your family and all this sort of stuff, your dream is going to turn into a nightmare. Is that the kind of dream you want? See, you're dreaming. What kind of dream do you want? First of all, notice, if you're even asking this question, why should I be a jerk? Why shouldn't I be a jerk, rather? If you're asking that question, you're already coming from a type of attitude that tells me that you're never going to reach awakening and you're never going to reach the understanding of absolute solipsism. So actually, you're fooling yourself because you're adopting this as a belief system, and then you're just going to use this as a license to go out there and just be a selfish asshole. If you're going to do that, you're not going to transcend suffering. You're not going to escape pain. You're going to be living in a complete delusion. You're going to be living in your dream, fully wrapped up in your dream. And what's more is that dream will slowly turn into a nightmare the more selfishly you act, the more people you harm. Because see, when you harm others in the dream, they lash back out and they harm you. So be prepared for a long life of suffering if you're going to choose this path of being a selfish jerk. Now, is there anything wrong with a life full of suffering? No. Suffer all you want. And in fact, that's sort of the game that God is playing here. So you have to start to wonder, like, what kind of game is God playing? Why did God construct this sort of life that it's living for itself? Well, maybe it's to teach things to itself and about how to live. Or about love, for example. So you can live your life however you want, but at the same time, if you could live it however you want, why wouldn't you choose good? Why wouldn't you choose love and selfishness over being a jerk and being selfish and harming others deliberately? You might say, well, Leo, the only reason I would choose to be good is if other people were real. But you're saying other people aren't real, so that means I don't need to be good. I can just be a selfish asshole. But you see what that reveals? That means that you were never interested in goodness. You were always interested in being evil. You see? Because if the only thing that kept you from being evil is thinking that other people suffered, that was the only reason you were nice to them, then actually you never cared about being good or loving. You were always evil. See, true goodness, true love is that you would even be nice if you recognize that you were in a dream and everybody else was an illusion, and you would still be nice to them. That would be true love. That would be a revelation of how deep your love goes. Because you would be so conscious that you would realize that they are just projections of your own mind. So as nice as you are to yourself, why not be that nice to other projections of your own mind? And why would you be that way? Because you're God. And because God is good, and God is loving for absolutely no reason, because that's just what it is. God and love and goodness don't need reasons. If you're looking for reasons, you're actually being evil and selfish. But Leo, why then shouldn't I be hedonistic? What's wrong with living a life that, if this is all just solipsism, I'm going to go shoot up some heroin and I'm going to go, skydiving and have a bunch of sex and, smoke a bunch of meth and all this sorts of stuff. What's wrong with that? Well, again, remember, the dream is still the dream. First of all, recognize you haven't transcended the dream, so it's not like you're awake. You're very far from that. So there's that. And then the other problem is that, again, there's consequences to how you live your life. So if you're going to live your life in a hedonistic way and smoke a bunch of meth and heroin and whatever else, be ready for a long life of misery and suffering. And you're not going to be conscious enough to transcend that suffering. So your suffering is going to feel very, very real to you. And even though in your mind you might be telling yourself, oh, but I'm suffering, but Leo told me the suffering isn't real. See, it doesn't matter what Leo told you, because your suffering and pain will be so profound that it will completely override anything Leo told you, anything I taught you, anything you believe. The pain will be more powerful than that. So be careful. Again, it's a question of what kind of dream do you want? Do you want to be a meth addict? Do you want to be a heroin addict? Go for it. No, but Leo, you can't say that. You need to discourage people from being meth addicts and heroin addicts. But look, if someone truly wants to be a meth addict or heroin addict, nothing I say will stop them, right? The truth is that there's absolutely no reason why you should not be a heroin addict. You might say, no, Leo, but a heroin addict experiences a lot of suffering. Yeah, a heroin addict experiences a lot of suffering, but there's absolutely no reason why someone can't live a life full of suffering. There's no reason. There's no reason why a life of suffering is any worse than a life of joy and bliss and orgasms. There's no reason at all, existentially speaking. But the problem is that, see, I'm speaking from a very, existential perspective, absolute perspective, where most people are not living. So those people who do become heroin addicts and so forth, they're not able to even know about that perspective. They're completely wrapped up in survival and just trying to escape their misery and suffering. And so for them, this philosophy, it's not going to do you any good at all in a practical sense. But Leo, solipsism is unfalsifiable. So what does that mean? Have you considered that solipsism is unfalsifiable because it's absolutely true? Go back to that episode where I talk about interpretations. Remember, I said a lot of things have multiple interpretations. So with this solipsism is unfalsifiable thing, you could interpret that as meaning, well, if it's unfalsifiable, that means it can't be true. Or maybe it's unfalsifiable because it's absolutely true. After all, you can't falsify that which is true. And even though solipsism is unfalsifiable, it is verifiable. And we're going to get to that in a minute. I promised you a method, and I'll give you one. But Leo, isn't it safe and logical to assume that that there are other minds? Isn't that what is most practical? Because after all, like you said, we kind of live at the practical level. We're just in survival. So, isn't it just practical just to assume that there are other minds? And the answer is, it doesn't matter what's practical. What matters is what's true. Practical versus true are two different things. There's a lot of things that are practical which are not true, and vice versa. So there's nothing safe or logical about assuming other minds. It's convenient. I'll grant you that. It's practical. It's useful if you want to keep living the dream the way you've been dreaming it. But it has nothing to do with truth, and you got to recognize that. But Leo, isn't just this a bunch of useless philosophy, like you said above? So what's the point? Well, it's not just useless philosophy because there is the possibility of transcendence. There is the possibility of awakening. So sure, you could treat all this as interesting philosophy and speculation. Just think about it, sitting there, eating your popcorn, thinking about it, and then moving on to other YouTube videos and whatever else, and doing nothing about it. You could do that, in which case, yes, I agree with you. It's totally useless. You should stop watching. But there's the other possibility where you recognize Leo is pointing to something beyond philosophy, beyond theory, beyond beliefs, beyond ideology. And that if I pursue and do work, and I validate it for myself and I actually awaken, then my entire life will transform and it won't just be merely philosophy. And there will be very practical consequences from that, which I can't even imagine yet. See? Another objection is, but Leo, non-duality isn't solipsism. Actually, it is. Because non-duality is just oneness. And oneness means you are one. That's what that means. And that is absolute solipsism. If you think non-duality is not solipsism, that's because you haven't connected the dots and you haven't awoken deeply enough to really see how all the facets of awakening fit together and what it ultimately culminates in. But Leo, if non-duality is solipsism, why don't enlightened teachers say so? Again, I've answered this in the past. There's multiple reasons. Either they haven't realized it for themselves, which is possible, or they don't want to freak you out, or they do say it, but they just sort of allude to it, but not being very explicit about it. They don't beat you over the head with it. All of those possibilities. Also, because solipsism has a negative cultural connotation, and they don't want their work associated with something negative. They want it to associate with something positive. But Leo, I'm awake and enlightened, and I've realized no self, and I've even realized God and love, and I've taken 5-MeO-DMT, and I still feel like other minds could be real. So I don't know what you're talking about. Again, go back to the point above where I talk about levels of awakening. You might think you're awake, you might think you're enlightened, you might think you realized God, love, and no self, and you might have even taken a bunch of 5-MeO-DMT, but the reality is that you still haven't deconstructed your entire mind, which is what's really necessary for you to understand what I'm talking about here. So you need to reach higher levels of awakening, is what I'm telling you. But Leo, I've already taken 50 5-MeO-DMT trips. Sorry, it's not enough. I don't know what to tell you. Awaken more, deconstruct more. But Leo, isn't this dangerous? Yeah, it's dangerous. Like I've warned in the past, spirituality is dangerous. There's a reason that very direct spiritual teachings were kept hidden, esoteric, part of cults and secret societies and so forth for thousands of years. Teachers were killed over this kind of knowledge and wisdom and teachings because it's extremely threatening to the entire ordeal, not ordeal, but sort of the entire, what word am I looking for? Sort of like the entire scheme of society. The social matrix, as I've talked about, right? This deconstructs the social matrix. It could also lead to problems for you personally. A lot of people could misunderstand these ideas. They could half-ass their awakening. They can use these ideas to harm others and to justify to themselves. They could use this to start a cult. They could use this to kill people. They could use this to rape people. They could use this to start a religion. They could use this to exploit people in business. They can use this and then they could start to lose their mind, literally go insane. They can destabilize psychologically. And many more such bad possibilities. All of that is possible. And the reason that is because, like I've said, when we're deconstructing the mind, what we're really dealing with is we're deconstructing survival. And when you say dangerous, what is that but survival? See, when you say truth is dangerous, yeah, you're right. Why do you think there's so much untruthfulness in the world? Because truth is dangerous. Truth is dangerous in the military. Truth is dangerous in politics. Truth is dangerous within science. Truth is dangerous within religion. Truth is dangerous within cults. Truth is dangerous within abusive relationships. Truth is dangerous within your family. You know, there's something truthful within your family that you could say at a Christmas gathering that would destroy your whole family. There's something truthful you could say within your intimate marriage or relationships that would destroy your marriage. There's something truthful you can tell your child that would cripple and destroy your child. There's something truthful you could say within an organization like a corporation that would destroy the corporation. There's something truthful you could say within a political party or a government administration that would destroy the presidency or would destroy the political party. There's something truthful you could say within a geopolitical meeting, a round table of, the top 10 countries in the world, G7 or whatever, There's something truthful you could say there that would cause a third world war. There's something truthful you could tell a person that would cripple them psychologically, that would deeply wound them emotionally, that would cause them a lot of suffering and pain. There's even something truthful you could recognize about your own self that would make you want to kill yourself. Yeah, truth is dangerous. This is why every culture, every society, every administration, every monarchy, every dictatorship has always controlled truth very, very carefully. Every religion. But just because it's dangerous doesn't make it any less true. In fact, the most dangerous things are oftentimes the truest. And they are hidden and swept under the rug precisely for that reason. Because what you care about is not truth, but survival. I've talked about that in my Understanding Survival episodes. But Leo, isn't this antisocial? Yeah, it's a bit antisocial. Society is an illusion. Yep. Isn't that sort of obvious? I mean, society is filled with so much bullshit. Socialization is filled with so much bullshit. You don't go to socialize to find the truth. When you want to find the truth, you go sit alone under a tree by yourself, like the Buddha did. That's how you discover truth. You don't find the truth by going to a fucking retreat with a bunch of fucking hippies and, singing Kumbaya in drum circles. You don't find the truth that way. As fun as that may be. But then again, there's nothing about realizing what I'm telling you that needs to make you antisocial. You can still socialize. Nothing is stopping you from socializing. You socialized your whole life in this dream, and you can continue to socialize after you become lucid in this dream. But Leo, does this mean that if I kill myself, my parents won't suffer? Again, we have to be very careful here. If you're listening to this and you're having thoughts of killing yourself, you should stop listening right now. Turn off this recording. I'm not talking to you. I'm not teaching you. The things that I teach are designed for psychologically stable people. If you have any kind of suicidal thoughts, the things I teach, you're not mature enough to handle. Your psyche is too fragile. And you're just not ready for truth. You need to deal with more basic stuff in your life. You need help from a professional. You need help from your family and friends. That's what you need. You don't need me. Stop watching me. But I also have to be truthful. And from the absolute point of view, you are the only thing that exists. And even though all of my teachings go against killing yourself, I always tell you not to harm the body and not to kill yourself. I also believe that it's your right to do so. If you want to kill yourself, that's your right. And ultimately, nothing I say is going to change that. I mean, even if I tell you not to kill yourself, if you really want to, you'll kill yourself. So I'm not going to stop you from killing yourself if you want to. Nobody can, so it's foolish to even try. I recommend you don't kill yourself and that you find help. But the truth of the matter is that you're the only thing that exists. So, I mean, I'm not going to lie to you just because you're suffering or you want to kill yourself. I'm going to tell you what's true. And then what you do with that, that's your responsibility. I recommend you don't kill yourself and that you find help. And that once you do stabilize psychologically, you come back and you can do this work in a healthy way where you don't harm yourself and others. But Leo, why shouldn't I kill you? If you're just an imaginary character in my dream, I can kill you then. Again, if you want to be a devil, if you want to be an asshole, if you want to be a jerk and you want to be selfish, nobody is stopping you. But again, remember, there are consequences. to your actions within this dream. But Leo, why then do you teach? If there's no one to teach, why are you doing this? I'm doing this because this is my dream from my point of view. This is my dream, and this is the path and role that I've chosen for myself, is to understand myself and then talk to myself about myself. And my talking to myself about myself is part of my self-understanding process. It's part of how I teach myself, and also part of the joy that I get from my dream. So from my point of view, which you are imagining within your point of view, which is the only thing that exists, I like doing this. At least for now. Maybe in the future I'll stop teaching. But for now, I like doing it. It's part of my process. Otherwise, I have nothing to do. I'm bored. I got to do something, right? So it's either this or go hunt squirrels or whatever else. You know, one thing is no better than the next. So you got to be doing something here. Anything you do is ultimately pointless because it's all being done for you. Honestly, this is what I found most fascinating. Maybe in the future I'll find something else more fascinating. I'll move on. But Leo, this is so depressing. Now, I didn't want to kill myself before, but now after hearing all this, now I want to kill myself. How am I supposed to enjoy life now? You've ruined my life for me. You've spoiled the whole thing. It's only depressing to you because you're going through a process of accepting it. Once you accept it, there's nothing fundamentally depressing about what I'm talking about here. It's the truth. The truth is a beautiful thing, in fact. The truth is a loving thing. Learn to love the truth. Accept it, go through a process. You're going to go through some existential crisis, go through it, and then you can still enjoy life. You can still have sex. You can still eat food. You can still have friends. You can still have a family. You can still raise children. You can do all of that shit. The only difference is that you are lucid enough to realize that it's all just a dream within your own mind. So can you still enjoy life? Yes, you can. I still enjoy my life. I'm not depressed over this. In fact, it's one of the most beautiful things you can realize. It's just a bit of an acquired taste, you see. It's sort of bittersweet. It's not that like sugary high that you just get from eating candy. It's a little bit of a dark chocolate sort of, a palate for dark chocolate. You appreciate the bittersweetness of it. You come to enjoy it. It's actually very beautiful to realize that this is all your own construction, that you are God, that you are love, that you are everybody else, that you are one with everybody else, that everybody else is your own mind, that you imagine your own parents. This is beautiful stuff. This is not a reason to kill yourself. So stop acting up with these stupid, negative things. Not necessary at all. But Leo, if you are conscious of what you're talking about here, why do you socialize? Why do you still go to clubs and do pickup and talk to girls and have sex? Because this is my dream and I enjoy it. Why would I not enjoy my own dream? Why would I consciously choose to live in a nightmare? As a human body, I still have needs, wants, cravings, certain, psychological and biological requirements that I need to satisfy. So I do enjoy socializing. Solipsism, and what I'm talking about here, is not a license nor a directive to be a loner and to sit at home in your basement, sulking and hating mankind. No, not at all. You can go and enjoy mankind, have fun, talk to girls, get married, have children, do all the stupid social stuff that human chimps do. You're cosplaying as a chimp, so you're going to have many chimp tendencies that you're going to want to satisfy. Otherwise, you're not going to be happy. And also remember that what I'm talking about here is that reality is imagination. So when you're imagining something, it is becoming real for you. So in a certain sense, there is no difference between people being real versus imaginary. Like, from a certain point of view, your mom is real as long as you imagine she's real. You can still relate to her in exactly the same way as you would relate to a real person. You can still relate to her as though she has feelings and consciousness and suffers and all this sorts of stuff. You can still love her and give her gifts and hang out with her, have fun with her. You can do all the stuff that you've always been able to do. Nothing has actually changed, right? Like, your abilities have not been reduced by awakening. In fact, they've just been enhanced. You have a deeper understanding. You're lucid in the dream. That gives you more power in the dream, but you can still dream and interact with the characters. You can still enjoy life. In fact, this is where enjoyment really comes from. Because now you got the stick out of your ass. Now you know what's really going on. Now you can relax. Now you can take it easy. You don't have to take everything so seriously. Enjoy life. That's the point of life. Enjoy it. Love. Spread love to others if you want. If you don't, then, whatever. Do whatever you want. You're not being limited here in any way at all by realizing that reality is a dream. You're being freed up. You're being liberated. So personally, lately, I've been socializing more than I ever have in my entire life, even though I've had these solipsistic realizations. So it's not a contradiction at all. And in fact, for those of you who are depressed and feel very lonely and feel miserable, don't have any friends, and are struggling with sex, I recommend more socialization for you, not less. Sitting at home in your mom's basement is not the solution to your problems. But Leo, isn't solipsism simply your own bias because you're an introverted loner type of guy and you always have been? Well, it's true. I'm a pretty introverted guy, loner type of guy. But then again, like I said, I've been socializing a lot lately. I've been posting some videos on my blog, doing a lot of socialization, enjoying it too, learning to enjoy it more. That's part of my own growth and development I'm still working on. Is solipsism my own bias? Go validate it for yourself. I'm not asking you to believe me. Go validate it. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's all just my bias. So you should go and validate for yourself whether what I'm saying is true. But Leo, isn't it still possible that other minds exist? After all, shouldn't you be open-minded? Shouldn't we open-minded here? Like, you teach about open-mindedness, so aren't you contradicting yourself? Because you're not being very open-minded when you say other minds can't exist. Open-mindedness is a tricky thing. I've talked about this in my other episodes about how open-mindedness works and so forth. I explain that sort of open-mindedness kind of goes full circle. You want to start with extreme open-mindedness, but then as you're exploring reality, you actually do have to close your mind to those things which you have become absolutely conscious of. So even though it might sound like I'm being closed-minded when I say that there's no possibility of other minds existing, actually, what happened was that I was completely open-minded, and then that led to absolute consciousness, and absolute consciousness is absolutely true. So I want you to open your mind to the possibility of absolute consciousness. And what that means is that you become absolutely conscious of something, and when you become absolutely conscious of it, you don't doubt it anymore. You see? So open-mindedness is a very tricky thing, because if you're taking the position that we should be always open-minded, actually you're being closed-minded to the possibility of closing your mind on certain things that you become absolutely conscious of. You see? So it's a little bit tricky. It's a bit counterintuitive. So when you fully awaken, you have to throw away all doubt. And then if you remain open-minded for the sake of just being doubtful, actually that's coming from fear, and that is untruthful, right? So your open-mindedness is actually less important than truth. What's most important is truth. Whatever is true, you need to open your mind to that. But once you've opened your mind to that which is true, and you have the truth, and then you start doubting the truth, now you're going backwards. You see, you have to understand when to stop. It's like a circle. When you reach the top of the circle, you have to stop at the top rather than going down into the pits of hell through your skepticism. I've talked about the dangers of misusing skepticism, and that's what this is in this case. Now you're saying, but Leo, but what if it's not possible to become absolutely conscious that other minds don't exist? Well, if that's the case, then notice that you're not open-minded to the fact that absolute consciousness is possible. So I would ask you to open your mind to that possibility. And what it means to open your mind to that possibility is that you close your mind to forever remaining eternally skeptical and open-minded about everything and questioning everything. See, that itself is a subtle dogma and a position that you're attaching your mind to. But Leo, shouldn't an all-powerful God have the power to create multiple selves and experiences? You make God seem like he's this weak thing because he can't create a real other human being. And this contradicts God's omnipotence. Like I said, God is you, a singular conscious entity. This entity, at its highest level, is one. It cannot be other than one. It can, however, multiply itself by subdividing itself. So through subdivision of itself, it can fragment itself and create multiple selves, in a sense. But these multiple selves, you have to understand from the highest perspective, are always quasi or pseudo selves. They are relative partitions which will collapse, and they are being imagined and held within your mind as God. So God can dream all sorts of selves, including your human self that you're cosplaying as right now. God can do all that, but God can also stop doing that and realize that it's one and that it's you. So there's not a contradiction there. The contradiction would be if God could actually separate itself from itself permanently. Because what you're asking for is like, you're asking for you to be God here, and then you're asking for somebody else to be God over there, and both have to be all-powerful and all-knowing and all-seeing, but at the same time also separate from each other. That is what is contradictory and actually impossible. God cannot permanently sever its own oneness. That would be untruthful, because the truth is that everything is one. But Leo, you said I could validate this. How can I validate this for myself so it's not just a philosophy or just some stupid ideology? Here's my scientific method. This is the best method I know. Now, it's not guaranteed to work, but this is the best method that I've found. Do 200 or more breakthrough 5-MeO DMT trips. And, this is important, in addition to that, do all the work that I teach in my videos and deconstruct your entire mind and reality. You're gonna have to do both simultaneously. And by the end of that, if you do it correctly, you should realize what I'm telling you here and validate it for yourself directly, beyond a shadow of any doubt. It doesn't have to take 200. It could happen faster for you. It happened faster for me, but just to be on the safe side, let's say 200. But Leo, 200, that sounds like a lot. That sounds like a lot of work, a lot of time. What if I don't want to do all that? Well, then you're not interested in truth and you're not serious. And in which case, move on, do something else with your life. This is work. I call it work because it takes work. But Leo, 200 trips, that sounds dangerous. Yeah, it's dangerous. It could kill you. If you do it wrong, it could kill you. I make no promises about the safety of these things. I'm just telling you what you would need to know if you were serious about finding the truth. If all you cared about is finding the truth, I'm telling you what you would need to know. And then as far as safety goes, I mean, I give warnings here and there about, safety protocols and how to be careful, but ultimately that's your responsibility. If you harm yourself, and you certainly could by being irresponsible or being sloppy, then I've given you so many warnings. That's on you. But Leo, how do I know that 5-MeO-DMT is not an illusion? How do you know that anything is not an illusion? How do you know that your reasoning right now is not an illusion? How do you know that the telescopes that scientists use are not an illusion? You see, this kind of doubt can be cast on anything. You're misusing skepticism. I've warned against this in the past. The only answer to this kind of doubt is go do it, test it. Stop doubting, stop sitting around and mentally masturbating in your head. Go test it and see what direct experience reveals. You might be surprised. But Leo, isn't this just your way of starting a cult? Give me some more credit than that. Do you think that honestly, with what I know, if I wanted to, I couldn't start a cult? You think that this, what you see right now on this channel, you think that this is the best cult that I could make if I was interested in making a cult? You really underestimate me if you think that. I have no interest in cults. Actualized will never become a cult. I've taken great precautions with my work to keep it from becoming a cult. Actually, in this case, the cult is materialism. The cult is mainstream spirituality. The cult is mainstream society. That's the real cult you should be worrying about. But Leo, what about helping others? What about helping others to escape their suffering? Or what about compassion? The Buddhists teach this. What about life purpose? You teach that. What about the bodhisattva vow, becoming a bodhisattva? What about that? Those are all nice, fine things to do within the dream. But if you're talking about completely awakening, all of that is just a distraction. There's utility to all those things. I'm not saying don't be compassionate at a relative level. I'm not saying, don't help your parents avoid suffering at a relative level. Do those things. Those are nice. But this idea that you're going to be going around saving mankind, this is all part of the dream. This is actually a deep illusion that keeps people from fully awakening. The sort of bodhisattva vow. There's nobody to save. There's nobody else to awaken but yourself. And if you think there is, that's part of your game that you're playing. You need to drop that in order to fully awaken. Now, with that said, I'm still big on life purpose. You should still have a life purpose. Just recognize that you're constructing a life purpose as part of the game that you're playing within this dream. But Leo, so is this something that I should even pursue? Why would I want to realize this? I can't speak to you and what you want. Everybody wants different things. Maybe all you want is to sit at home and watch TV and have a family and play with your kids and just die of old age with your spouse together, living in the illusion. Maybe that's what you want, in which case go do that. You don't need me. My work is for people who care about truth and ultimate understanding of reality, who cannot live without understanding themselves and reality at the highest level. If you want that, then this is the solution to that. What I teach is a solution to that. But more so what I would say is that I have never been happier in my life personally than in those instances where I have awoken to the fact that I am completely alone. This has produced joy in me that words could never describe. It is the ultimate thing that you want, but you dare not pursue. And when you finally get it, it's going to be so good, the goodness of it will torment you and ultimately annihilate you. Your ego doesn't want it, but your God self, that's all it wants. You don't even know what happiness is until you realize that all others are yourself. But it is a process, and your ego may resist it, and your ego might go through quite a bit of suffering and turmoil to get to the point where it surrenders to the truth. So I'm not promising it'll be easy or fun, but if you get to the ultimate point where you surrender to it, it's going to be pure bliss and love and happiness. But Leo, so what now? What do I do with all this information? How can I use this? How can I make this practical? You make it practical by actually doing the work of deconstructing your mind, reality, questioning everything, and then doing some spiritual practices, whether that's meditation, yoga, self-inquiry, psychedelics, or a combination of all the above. I've already told you my preferred methods. And you seek to become directly conscious of what was told to you here. And you are very careful about not taking this on as just a belief or an ideology, because that's not the same thing as what I'm talking about. And it will have practical consequences, but not as a belief system. I'm not telling you to adopt this belief system and then tomorrow go to your family, have dinner with them and then accuse them all of not being real. That's not what I'm telling you to do. If you do that, you're stupid and you will suffer for it. That's not what we're talking about. You have to actually become conscious of things that are being said here, not just believe in them. But Leo, I ask some person X, like my mom or my dad or my professor, and he or she reassured me that I am not really alone, the way you say. Yes, of course they're going to reassure you, because they're playing the same game that you're playing. And the game that you're playing is you're playing the game of denying that you're playing games. You're playing the game of denying that you're dreaming. And they are dreaming along with you. And they are part of your dream. And you are dreaming them. So, of course, you are dreaming that they are not dreaming, because you're also dreaming that you're not dreaming. That's your dream. So don't go to other people to verify this for you. Nobody's going to verify for you that you are all alone. Do you see how stupid that is? How circular that is? How question-begging that is? Asking others to verify that you're all alone? If you're all alone, there's nobody who can verify it for you. But Leo, I feel so lonely now. How do I deal with this loneliness? Practically speaking, if you're feeling lonely and miserable because of your loneliness, the solution is not to go sit under a tree and meditate or to sulk. If you're feeling lonely, go talk to people. Go socialize, go have fun, go have sex, go to a party, get drunk. This is how you deal with loneliness at a practical level. Now, if you're doing this serious spiritual work, you're going to go through phases of loneliness where you're going to be away from people, and that's fine. You go through that in a deliberate, conscious manner where you're facing your own loneliness. But if you're just constantly gnawed by loneliness, and you're not even mature enough or, selfless enough and wise enough to go into this deep spiritual work, for many of you, you're lonely not because of the spiritual work. You're lonely simply because you're not taking action by going out and socializing. I go out and socialize when I'm feeling lonely. Now, sometimes I can feel lonely and just sit at home and kind of work through it spiritually, but other times I can feel lonely just for more of a sort of a psychological perspective, for more of just sort of like, I need to get out of my house. I've already meditated enough. And then I go and I actually force myself, even though I don't want to, I'll force myself to go to a club or to socialize with people or talk to girls or whatever. I do that and it makes me feel better. Because as a human chimp, we have a certain degree of socialization that we need, and we need to meet those needs. So go do that. Don't use spirituality or solipsism as an excuse to become a loner or a recluse. That's a mistake. But Leo, will any of this make me happy? What if I just care about happiness and the ending of suffering, and I don't really care about truth or self-understanding? What if I just want to end my suffering? I don't teach the ending of suffering. Honestly, I don't care. I don't care about your suffering, and I don't really even care about my suffering. What I care about is truth and understanding. If all you care about is happiness and the end of suffering, go find other teachings that are about that. That's not what my teachings are about. But here's the thing you don't foresee, because you lack vision. What you don't foresee is that actually, if you were to achieve total self-understanding, that would be the highest happiness and the end of suffering. But you don't get there by desperately seeking the end of suffering. You get there by forgetting about your suffering, fuck your suffering, focus on doing the work, focus on self-understanding, with a trust that when you reach the truth, when you reach the highest awakening, that will be the ultimate thing you've ever wanted. There needs to be just a core trust in that. Not because it's going to make you happy, and not because it's going to end your suffering, but simply because you want the truth and you want the understanding, even if it makes you suffer, you still want it. And that, paradoxically, is what allows you to transcend suffering and to reach the highest bliss and happiness that is possible. The highest happiness is realizing that you're God. That's the FAQ. So we're wrapping up here. In conclusion, I'll say that, again, what I'm talking about here is not an ideology and it's not a belief system. Really, what I'm talking about is the answer to the question of what is other? You need to have an awakening to what is other. So contemplate that. Do not take solipsism on as a belief. Become conscious of what is actually true, whatever that is. And if for you right now, what is true is that people feel real to you, if your mother feels real to you, then that is what's true for you. Go with that. Stay with that. Stay with what's true in your direct experience. Stay with what's true and what you're conscious of, not with what I'm saying. You can hold what I'm saying as a possibility that maybe one day you will reach, but for now, it's not true for you. Don't fake it as being true. Be honest that it's not true for you. Keep going and living your life as though people are real. And then one day, maybe you'll discover in 5 or 10 years that they're not real. And then things will change. But don't try to fake it till you make it sort of thing where you're trying to like act as though people aren't real, but deep down, you think they're real. That is going to create a twisted, dysfunctional dynamic. And finally, I'll leave you with this. People talk about liberation a lot within spiritual circles. Well, consider this, that true liberation is actually freedom from the illusion of other. Think about that. Why would that be true? You know, there's a great, I think it's a Sartre quote that says that hell is other people. Imagine how free you would feel if you shed the illusion of other. Freedom from other makes you absolute. Freedom from other makes you sovereign. Freedom from other is what makes you God. And remember, you're not just alone. You're alone with a capital A alone, which means that you're so alone only because you're so together. right now, you're not alone. It feels to you that there are all these others around you, some of them good, some of them bad and evil. And so you like some of them, you hate other ones, and you're always struggling between them. These are all fragments of God's mind. And so when you are becoming alone with a capital A, what's happening is that actually you're recollecting all these pieces and you're fusing them together as though God was suffering from multiple personality disorder. You're fusing all those personalities into your own God self, and then you become whole. You become one. You become one mind. And when that happens, all others become self. And then you're healed. And then you are together forever as yourself. You've unified all those others into yourself, and this is what produces the deepest love. It doesn't just produce feelings of love, it literally is the very metaphysical fabric of what love is. Love isn't a feeling you feel. Love is the recognition of the fundamental oneness that is your being. Love is unity. Love is togetherness. So the reason this isn't depressing or negative in the ultimate sense is because it's not that you separate yourself from all those others and negate them by saying, oh, that's an illusion, my mom's an illusion, my dad's an illusion, my wife is an illusion. No, it's that you recognize that, yes, it's an illusion, but that is not what separates me from them. That is what unifies me with them. They are my own dream. They are my own mind. And as I love myself and my own mind, as I am love, I encompass all of my own sub-personalities and sub-dreams and illusions. And I take responsibility for creating all that. And that doesn't detract from me or from my creation. That actually enhances it. Now I am lucid. I am awake within my own creation. And because I am one with my own creation, now I can act in a proper relationship with all of them selflessly, rather than needing things from them. I can act with love, with a proper understanding of what they are and what I am. And that's awakening. All right, that's it. I'm done here. A lot of stuff. I hope we've beaten this horse to death about solipsism, so I expect no more questions from you guys about solipsism. Stop pestering me about it. I've covered every one of your objections here. So you should start to notice going forward that my teachings are going to become more radical and less compromising. This is not a bug, this is a feature. I've warned you guys in the past that if you don't stay with me and do this work with me, I'm going to leave you in the dust, and that's exactly what's going to happen. So it might seem on some level that I'm becoming more dogmatic or arrogant or narcissistic about these teachings because I'm becoming more clear and more decisive. But actually what's happening is that I'm just becoming very clear in my own mind about what it is I've realized, the different facets of awakening, really organizing them well in my own mind, understanding them very deeply, and then communicating them in a very direct manner in the style that I like, which is direct, 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 direct. That can turn some people off, but hey, that's my style. So take it or leave it. But anyways, yeah, the reason that I'm uncompromising on some of these points is not because I'm dogmatic about it or closed-minded about it. It's simply because I really want to cut through the bullshit. There's a lot of bullshit. Even amongst spiritual teachers, there's a lot of bullshit. And when I was starting this path 5 years ago or so, I don't even remember how long it was, I just feel like I was not served very well by a lot of the spiritual teachers that I looked up to the books that I've read, the retreats that I went to, honestly, I feel like a lot of it was bullshit. And not all of it. Some teachers were great, and I'm grateful to them, but a lot of it is still not direct enough for my taste. So I really like being direct. And I wish that somebody would have told me these things when I started off. So in a certain sense, again, I'm just teaching myself here. I'm telling myself the things that I would want to know if I was doing this all over again, to save myself time and confusion and all of this. I wish somebody would have told me from the very beginning, when I first learned about enlightenment and awakening, that it was just solipsism, absolute solipsism. If they would have told me that, that would have simplified my journey. It would have saved me some years and, many, many hours of contemplation and racking my mind around about this stuff. And so I hope that that's ultimately what you get from this episode and from me. And remember, when you're getting it from me, that's just you giving it to yourself.